Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City of Waterloo Council meeting, Monday, January 27th, 2020 at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is a land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. A moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we pause to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. Next item, disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Councillor Bonagor.
Yes, I will be stepping out for item 5B due to that being my spouse's place of employment.
Thank you. Councillor Vasic.
Number 201, related to my place of employment.
And that's in the budget. Thank you. Approval of minutes. Councillor Hanmer, Councillor Veith, all those in favor? All the minutes, which there's one. Delegations, first up, 5A, enforcement of the idling control bylaw. Delegation is Sharon Woodley. Welcome.
Council, city staff, friends and neighbors. First of all, I want to congratulate Council and I thank you for unanimously declaring a climate emergency in November 2019. The city website says, this declaration is meant to signal political determination to reduce planet-warmed fuel emissions that scientists say are changing the climate and threatening the earth. I find it hopeful and encouraging to live in a city in which you, our elected officials, are committed to reducing our emissions. This chart shows that half of our emissions, this is a regional chart, but still we live in the region, half of our emissions are contributed to transportation. And when I saw this, I found it shocking. UVs in 2017 was 81 megatons. That is the same amount of emissions as from the oil sands that year, on which the climate spotlight shines far more than our drive to work. Conveniently, in this city, we already have an idling control bylaw, which was passed in 2009. And could be an excellent tool to help us reduce our carbon emissions. Unfortunately, this bylaw, to my knowledge, has never been enforced. I have been talking to drivers for years. I go up to their window and knock on it and ask the driver to turn their engine off. Sometimes I give them a little card that I have printed up. My husband actually printed them up and gave them to me for my birthday. It says, turn your engine off, Waterloo City Bylaw 09077. Over all these years, no one I've talked to has ever heard of the bylaw. No one knew what I was talking about, not one person. This lack of awareness carries over to the additional problem now, it seems more common, of drivers texting while idling. People, when texting, don't seem to realize that their vehicles are even running. They are so absorbed in their phones. Every large parking lot has drivers texting while idling. Even our police force needs educating. Just last week, it was reported that 30 empty and idling vehicles in this region were stolen in the last 2 months. And the police response, as reported in the record, was to advise people to use a remote starter or sit in the car while it's warming up. The response needs to be, there's no need to idle our vehicles. Period. National Resources Canada says that if most Canadian drivers limited idling to 3 minutes a day over the course of a year, that's 3 minutes 1.4 million fewer tons of CO2 emissions would go into the atmosphere. Isn't that astounding? Most recently, I read on the National Resources website that 10 seconds is becoming the rule, especially for city fleets of vehicles. A light-duty car with a warm engine that idles for more than 10 seconds emits more greenhouse gases than shutting down the engine and starting it again. When you idle your vehicle, the engine is functioning in its most inefficient mode, and you are sending out more CO2 than when driving. Idling is actually hard on the engine of your car and uses more fuel. National Resources Canada says that even in cold weather, it's not necessary to warm up your car for more than 2 or 3 minutes. A related concern is air quality. Eliminating idling would help to clean up the air around schools, playgrounds, and rec centers. So, at our neighborhood barbecue this past September, the city's bylaw department had an information booth. I was so pleased to see this. So I went up to talk to them. I asked, when would the no idling bylaw be enforced? They laughed at me. They laughed. The 2 officers said, good luck, as if this was an impossible request. Does bylaw need some restructuring to make implementing this bylaw a priority? Drive-throughs. Several people have asked me to talk to you about their concerns around drive-throughs and idling, and that they want this topic addressed by our council. Toronto led the way in 2002 in terms of banning the construction of new drive-throughs, and at least 26 Canadian municipalities have followed suit. It's great to read on our city website that the City of Waterloo now has 4 service trucks equipped with solar panels on their roofs, which provide power when the trucks are in service. This is a great step, and I hope that we are working towards our whole fleet of service vehicles being solar powered in this way. So to sum up, an enhanced educational and community awareness campaign would be an important step towards changing public behavior. The city could work with Climate Action Waterloo. It is part of their mandate to support and promote other organizations in our community to lower emissions. We need signage. I don't know. Kevin, do you have that photo of Toronto's?
I'm sorry,
that one didn't work? Okay. In Toronto, they have like metal signs, like the no parking signs, right on posts saying 1 minute for idling. This is a big project, but we can do it if we work together as a community. Isn't this what we want most? To lower our emissions and reduce our carbon footprint. Isn't this what the kids who march on Fridays are asking for? They want their politicians and leaders, all of us, to work together to make important changes now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and I hope you got more for your birthday than just those business cards. I don't know how you got away with that, but it's a good idea. No, well spoken. Thank you for highlighting this. I'll look for questions for the delegate from Council. Councillor Bonagor.
Through you, Chair Jaworski, thank you very much for bringing this issue in to us. When I sat on Climate Action Waterloo Region advisory boards, it was a big topic that I would bring up there as well. I'm just curious, what kind of response have you gotten from people regarding those cards? Have you been there when anyone received one, or have you had any feedback?
Well, I talked to 2 people today. I didn't have my cards with me, but about the cards, I think they're useful. Sudbury has done an amazing job on educating their public. They don't have a bylaw, but they reduced vehicle emissions by 1/3 with information, and they gave out cards. That's a recent study. You could look it up. I forget the name, the actual name of it, but Sudbury No Idling. But today I talked to 2 people in the Laurier parking lot, and the first man said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I don't want this car, I want an electric car." And he said, "But they're so expensive." And that is one of the problems. And the other person I noticed when I went into Laurier, he was idling. And so when I came out, I gave him time. And I said, "You're idling your car?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, we have a bylaw." And he said, okay. So, I mean, when you explain it, sometimes but they don't know about the bylaw. They don't know. So we need to educate people.
I know when I've done something similar where I've seen people idling, and it's one thing to go and ask someone to turn their engine off. It's a lot easier to go and say, "Can you turn your engine off?" There's a bylaw against it. So it kind of gives you an impetus to have the discussion. I'm just curious, in an ideal world, what would you like to see? Because enforcing it is difficult. We'll get to that later when we get to ask questions of staff, but enforcement is just, logistically difficult. But is there something that you'd really like to see?
Several things. I know that, and I've read a lot of websites, well, not a lot, but I know that they say if it's longer, if you can be idling for longer, then it gives the bylaw officers more time. So that's just defeating the purpose. There's more idling, and I'd like to see some bylaw that we need to hire more bylaw people. That's the baseline. And are we going to have money for that, or when can we do that? Because we need to start enforcing it. And I have talked to Shane Turner, and we're going to have a discussion later. And he said that the penalty is $75. And so I think that needs to be out there too. And in some cities, it's like up to 150, or it rises if you're charged more than once. It can be up to 500. We have to take it seriously. But what I would like to see, ideally, I'd like to have some of those signs like they have in Toronto that just say 1 minute idling. Okay.
Thank you. And I think, certainly the bylaws do express the values of the community, I find, and hopefully enforceability will get some answers on that. Councillor Veith, and then Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, thank you, Sharon, for coming today. And all of your points are well taken. And I think, we have a climate emergency here, and this council has, signed on to that. So you're absolutely correct. We need to take this stuff seriously. And I thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Okay, you're welcome.
Next up, Councillor Freeman.
Through Mayor Jaworski, thank you for coming. And I appreciate you pointing to the fact that 50% of emissions, it's not just in the region, but more broadly across the country, do come from transportation. We do have anti-idling signs listing the bylaw. They're in front generally of all of our recreation facilities. So there's one, for example, in front of Albert McCormick in the drop-off zone. So where we anticipate that a car might idle, we've certainly tried to put signs there. And so our signs say stop idling, turn it off in 10 seconds, and then lists our bylaw. Mm-hmm. And
I've never seen one. Sorry.
Yeah, Albert McCormick is a good place to look. I think we also have them in the center of the circle zones at the rec center, certainly in where we typically see cars idling alongside Rim Park. And so we've tried certainly within our facilities where we've observed vehicles to be idling to advise them that it's that we have a bylaw contrary to this. In fact, that bylaw was brought forth by Councillor Whitmer in his first term of office and unanimously adopted by this council. And it is tricky. Bylaw is tricky because when we look at those transportation emissions and when we look at how we allocate a financial resource to addressing the transportation issues, oftentimes placing those resources in another location other than anti-idling will actually be a larger impact to reducing that 49%. So whether that's buying electric vehicles for our own vehicles, or what we did this year was we purchased solar panels so that our vehicles don't have to idle anymore, that when they're working within the cab of their vehicle, they can turn off their engine and then use solar power to do the work that needs to be done. For example, our building inspectors, a lot of times they do work in their vehicle before they attend a site, and so I think that's one thing too. Like as a council, we'll have to consider what's the balance in terms of allocation of resource to things like bylaw. And I think it's tricky because as soon as someone sees a bylaw officer, they do what they know they were supposed to do. And I agree with you wholeheartedly about drive-throughs. I think I've certainly been very vocal about not having any more drive-throughs in the city, right, Mayor? So it's really nice to hear that from the broader citizenry too, so that it doesn't feel as though it's just council trying to affect change through the Planning Act. And I would really encourage you that when we do have an application, like the nightmare Tim Hortons there at Erbsville Road, that more individuals in the community would come out and support a council decision that says, no, don't amend the bylaw for a drive-through, because that entire planning process was just about a drive-through.
So what is the bylaw on drive?
So some of the areas in the city of Waterloo, and that was the sole raison d'etre of the planning application. And we were split at this council on that application, and it went through. So it's always really good to hear from folks when they're willing to say, no, I don't use drive-throughs, I turn my car off, I park it, I go in, and so on. And it's super to hear that, so I really appreciate your comments about that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no further comments, thank you very much. And I know you'll have ongoing conversations with Mr. Turner, and I think we might have questions for Mr. Turner yet after this. Thank you. And I know today I was out for a walk with my, thank you Ron Ormson, for my City of Waterloo Engineering Services ball cap, and when I walked past construction sites, boy did I get a lot of attention. So maybe we need bylaw hats for everybody who's around here. Questions for staff? Yes, Neil, Councilor Barnago.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, just to follow up on some of the points raised by Ms. Woodley. Has this bylaw ever been enforced?
Mr. Klugman, did you want to? Sorry, my apologies. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, just to clarify, the bylaw has been administered, I think minimally, but administered. We've received complaints. Probably the majority of our complaints relate to vehicles like trucks unloading or trucks in loading docks behind plazas and that sort of thing. We get very little in the way of any complaints about vehicles in driveways, although we know that that's a particular issue in the wintertime. So there has been some enforcement. First of all, I want to indicate that the delegate raises some very good issues. It is time for us to take another look at how we can meet the objective. And I think it's important to understand that meeting the objective of the bylaw can be done in several ways. And I think the education piece probably is more important than the enforcement. And, I apologize that Mrs. Woodley got a response from our officers at that booth. It was unfortunate. I don't think it was meant to be dismissive, but I think what it did was underline the challenges with this bylaw. The very simple one is there's actually three pieces to this that create a challenge with enforcing a rule versus the education piece. One is there's several exemptions for types of vehicles. There's exemptions for weather conditions, hot and cold. And then the third piece of it is that a ticket has to be served on the vehicle. So if we're watching a vehicle for 3 minutes, then approach the vehicle, they're certainly going to drive away or stop. Typically, they drive away. So I think it's really important for us to focus on the education piece. Mrs. Woodley and I talked briefly about having an ongoing conversation around that. You're soon about to see that our business plan for the next 3 years focuses on community safety as well as public awareness and education, and so I think there's a nice dovetail there. The last piece, although I can't comment too much, with regard to our partners to the south, I know it's on their radar screen as well, and so we've talked with our colleagues at the City of Kitchener's Bylaw Enforcement Office, and we think there's a good opportunity to to share some information and perhaps look at joint education services that way. So minimal enforcement, but a little bit.
I think I would agree that the point of the bylaw is not to issue lots of tickets, it's to get people to stop idling. Like that's ultimately what we're going for. My next question was probably better directed to Mr. Ivoroni. When we're looking at getting that message out there, actually, Mr. Tony, you did mention that you don't hear much regarding vehicles and driveways. I hear from people regarding vehicles and driveways because neighbours have a hard time raising this with their neighbour. You know, they're not happy about the fact that the neighbour is idling for 5 to 10 minutes to warm up their vehicle, but that's an awkward conversation to have with someone who is otherwise a great neighbour. So people have actually asked me if the city does have any leaflets or brochures or perhaps a handy little business card sized thing which could be shared with a neighbour or with a vehicle that's seen regularly idling near a school, something like that. Have we looked at doing something like that before? Is there something we could do along those lines?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, certainly, Councillor, we could work with Enforcement Services to develop a campaign. We don't currently have anything like that.
I'd certainly appreciate you looking into it because I think there's a great education opportunity to be had here.
Thank you. I think one challenge is, and I think the delegate brought it up, is the fact that there's a whole bunch of stipulations behind our rules. So, for example, in past few months, you wouldn't be able to enforce it because it's never been below or above 5 degrees Celsius, right? So it has to be below 5 degrees. I'll ask Mr. Turner to clarify some of the challenges of the stipulations of the bylaw on temperature and that.
Around the temperature piece, the bylaw states that it doesn't apply if the outside temperature factoring in a
Wind chill
the
and humidex.
the humidex first is over 27 degrees, or in the wintertime less than 5 degrees Celsius, including the wind chill. So the 5 degrees seems a little off to me, and I think that's one of the reasons why we probably need to have a closer look at the regulations themselves.
Yeah. I do think that the picture that we see on our screen here today really tells the story. It's regardless of all the other things, idling is something that should be tackled.
And to my point, that's where the education could come in, because it could be less about we have an anti-idling bylaw with all of these stipulations. It could just be more to the point of idling is bad for the environment and it's bad for your vehicle. And if we use that as our starting point, and then as Mr. Turner pointed out, maybe have another look at the bylaw to see if the temperature range is adequate or whether that needs updating. I think this is a great conversation to have started.
Okay. Thank you. And Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. It would be helpful too that when we look at the communications piece, whether we can consider partnering with some of our service providers and our facility rentals. In particular, we can imagine that there's some user groups that may pick up and drop off more frequently. I know that as a hockey parent, it was once the children were old enough, it was commonplace to see vehicles idling as the children gathered their gear, and or idling while waiting for children to return with their gear. So maybe too we could seize those opportunities of the different times of year when the registrations happen for those partners to provide, whether it's a business card or whether it's just that reminder about the bylaw and especially the fact that they're in these very open public places. I suffer from asthma, so it's very difficult for me when the emissions do build up around the entryways, especially diesel emissions. So I think maybe we could look at that too.
So what I'm hearing from council is, is there a direction that we want to provide staff today? So for example, we've talked a bit about the bylaw, but I know Mr. Turner said he's going to be having further discussions with Mrs. Woodley and others and thoughts on the bylaw. And, or do we want to direct staff for that to be done, number one, and second would be education if we want to instruct staff to do something in that regard. Councillor Vasek.
Thanks. I didn't know if you were wrapping up, so I just wanted to. Okay. Okay, thanks through you, Mayor. Related to the public education campaign and something you said about 10 seconds, I wonder if people also don't shut off their car because they've heard if how long should you, which is worse, keeping it on for a certain period of time or turning off your car and turning it back on? So having a good sense of what are those seconds or minutes that it's worse to turn it on and off, or if you just idle it. So like if you leave it for 15 seconds, is that the benchmark of when it's bad to turn it on and off or whatever? Anyways, just a thought.
Right, absolutely.
Debunking myths or something.
Exactly. I think that there is some good research can go into the education campaign.
And then the second question I had just related, because you brought up Laurier as an example, and there are, as I understand it, there's a number of people who can enforce bylaws kind of on their private property, right? Or so Laurier might be an example of that. So I guess I'm just curious, because I'm not sure how likely it will be to add more enforcement officers for this particular purpose or other purposes. So what I'm really curious about is, does the education also need to happen with these private property owners? So what are they typically giving tickets out for? Is it just for parking violations? Are they aware that they can also educate or give tickets for things like idling? So would they be included in a public education campaign as well, Laurier or other private bylaw people?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, it's a good question. It's a good point. It certainly can be built into our education campaign. Typically, private property officers only enforce parking regulations, but this anti-idling bylaw is a parking regulation, so it can be part of the package. And I'm sure, I just think of the two universities, and I'm sure they would certainly be on board in terms of the education piece. I think that we could handle it a lot more. Of the cards well within before the 3-minute mark to help get the message across, certainly more than tickets. And I'll certainly let Mr. Woodley know that my birthday is coming up in a couple of months, so I'm hoping that we can get some added cards. But it is absolutely certain that that we can engage the largest number or the partners we have on private property that enforce the largest number of parking violations to get on board. The universities, I can't imagine it'd be a challenge with that.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just thinking about the challenges. That's great. And I'm thinking about the challenges of somebody calling in about enforcement and then the time it takes the bylaw officer to get out there, like you mentioned. So if you have the private property officers kind of just watching for it, they're right there anyhow. So it kind of mediates that time. Thank you.
Okay, so what I think we heard is there's some things that we'd like you to look into in the bylaw. Do you feel you have sufficient understanding of the things we're contemplating? It's not a full bylaw review, is my understanding.
No, we will look at those elements of the bylaw that create the biggest challenge.
Okay.
But the most important piece of this really would be a solid public awareness campaign.
Wonderful. Okay, so I think we want to provide direction to staff. Should we move that to the clerk? Should we move that? Okay, so provide direction to staff to look into the bylaw and further education on this in light of the climate emergency. Moved by Councillor Bonagor, seconded by Councillor Hanmer. Any discussion? One, Councillor Henry.
I'm happy to support the motion and direction, but to get back to Councillor Freeman's point, I think it's really important that as we think of the pantheon of actions we're going to need to take to address a climate emergency, that we not diminish the meaning of the words when we raise them around issues by doing what is so easy and so common that so many of us do, and that's seeing a specific action that is small and in the grand scale of things minuscule in terms of the impact, and thinking by focusing on that we actually tackle the big picture issues that we're having. The issues that I know Climate Action has been having when they've been going out to the public and asking folks for ideas on how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the region, they see this common fallacy emerge. People will say, I need to switch my light bulbs to LED. What they don't say is, I should reconvert my furnace back from natural gas to electric. The first does almost nothing. In fact, if you're using electricity on that, Ontario's grid is basically green. So it does actually nothing in terms of climate change. But the furnace, that's the big ticket. The big ticket here is the car. Not whether it's idling. It's important that it not idle for air quality emissions, and if you're driving one, that you don't idle. But the important thing is there needs to be fewer cars on the road, taking fewer trips and going less distance. So when we think of how we apply the resources and how we think about dealing with and responding to climate emergencies, we need to get the big stuff right, and we need the public to be thinking about the big stuff. We can help them with this one. But for my dollar, when we're going through budget cycle, it's the big ones that we need to have change on.
So in saying that, are you better off if we were to crop the words "in light of the climate emergency" off that motion? Since it makes sense. I made it up, so it's at the leisure of the movers. Any further thoughts? Otherwise, I'll call the vote. No. Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? It's all of us. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Woodley. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Tony. Oh, and he's still here. Ian Klugman. Communitech Annual Update. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Jaworski and Council, for giving me the opportunity to appear before you today. I wanted to take this opportunity to give you an update as to what we've been up to and what we're seeing, and provide that opportunity as well for you to ask any questions you might have along the way. So when we think back and we to the history of this organization called Communitech, it is very much akin to many of the other stories in the community. Issues were raised, opportunities were seized, people rallied around doing something, and that's really very much the story of our organization. And it really was both a crisis and an opportunity in the community. There was tens of thousands of jobs were being lost in the region, and there was a movement, a group of people who came together and said, we really could broaden the impact of our industry by focusing on this emerging opportunity called technology. And so the founding members of our organization talked a lot about this notion of jobs for our kids and ensuring the long-term prosperity of our region. And this group of relatively unattractive individuals came together to be the founders of Communitech. And from day one, we've always been mission-driven. We are here to support people starting and growing great companies, creating jobs in our community. And the mission over time and our purpose have grown to play a much broader role both in the province and across the country, as much of our work now is focused on making sure that we have the right policy environment in place at the federal and provincial level. And when we think about what we do, we're not strictly focused on just the companies that we serve. We do pay attention. We try and create value for our customers. We also take the stewardship of public and private funds very, very seriously. Try to deliver a very strong ROI for our investors. We try to be good partners with universities, colleges, Accelerator Center, Velocity, and all the other groups that share this objective of how do we build a strong and robust innovation economy. We try to be a great place to work and have a very strong value proposition about what we can do for people. And then we also have a strong commitment to our community. And we believe that we have a responsibility. There's a social contract in this community that says that we need to make sure that we're paying attention to people not being left behind as jobs are displaced. And that we have the kind of economy and community that will allow us to be competitive in the future. So now at this point in time, we're over 1,400 members. And really, what do? We do a lot of things. We tend to focus on organizing the suite of programs and services based on company size. So for startups, we tend to focus on helping them figure out their go-to-market strategy, sizing their market, raising capital, hiring people. We focus with growth firms really on dealing with the issues of organizational or operational complexity, and these would be companies between $10 and $100 million in revenue. And then for the large corporations, we have over 65 large corporations that we work with, and some really interesting organizations as well, including the Royal Canadian Air Force, WSIB, and LCBO. But really what we try and do is we help them leverage this ecosystem to their advantage and to find those intersections between small, medium, and large companies that create value for all. And we think about the highlights in this past year. We've brought thousands of people to our community. We've hosted, we've helped people, we've run some of the largest tech recruiting events that we've ever had in our community, and we've helped our member companies raise over $680 million. So the City of Waterloo has long been an important partner in this. Partnership is the way that we have been able to build this remarkable organization. It is a public-private model, which means that every additional dollar I can bring into the organization, I can bring $5 extra against that shared objective. And so this notion of leverage is a powerful piece and what has allowed us to build such a strong organization. And we're seeing some real results from the investments that we collectively have been making in the region over the years. The facility, which is just down the street, the data hub, there are over 250 people who are employed there every day with 55 companies. And it's evolved since we first launched it. When we started thinking about data, it was when we were launching a satellite mesh network with ComDev in 2012. And it has evolved. We at the time said we needed to start paying attention to this thing called data. Everyone else was talking about frontier technologies. And we said we really need to be paying attention to data. And of course, since then, now data has become discussions about sovereignty and conversations that are deeply political. And we're at the center of that. And in sort of conjunction with what we've been able to do around data innovation, we've also brought to bear our investments in frontier technologies and bundled that up at the hub. And so now we have our autonomous vehicle program, our AI program. We have the first spin out from Perimeter Institute is housed at the data hub. So all of the emerging technologies, our 5G network, et cetera, are all in partnership with the focus on data at the data hub. And when we think back over the last 10 years, 3,300 startups, $2.5 billion in capital raised, 20,000 net new jobs in the region. We also track and report every 2 years through Deloitte, and they do an economic impact study, and they do this reporting called attributable value. And so what that means is it's not us saying, well, we worked with 10 companies and they got this much value from it. They actually go out to the companies and they say, how much capital have you raised, and what percentage would you attribute to the impact that Communitech had? How many people have you hired, and what would you attribute to Communitech as to your ability to be able to do that? And so it's our customers saying what value we provided to them, and that gets us to about $1.1 billion since 2013. So what's our focus going forward? We have launched this coalition. We're big into what we call collaboratives. We talk a lot about the history of Waterloo region and our ability to collaborate, and so we started spending some time saying, can we be intentional at standing up collaboratives around specific opportunities or threats in our community? We've launched one around the future of work and learning, and we've launched one around the future of retail. We're looking at data collaboratives. The idea is to say, how as we as a community do we solve these kind of core issues that we face in the future that allow us all to be more competitive in the national or global markets. We also have launched something called Communitech Outposts, which is we're going to establish legal corporations in all 7 of the G7 countries. And what we want to do is make it as easy to hire salespeople in those markets as it is to hire salespeople in Canada. Because we are, in our community, in our Southern Ontario, there's 90% of the companies don't export. And those 43% of the companies don't export, and of that, those who do export, 90% only export to the U.S. So we need to become a better exporting nation. Of course, we're going to run True North again this year, and we are doing something very, very different, which is actually the same. When we first launched True North, it was to be a large urban conference akin to South by Southwest that would run on the spine of the LRT. However, there was no LRT for the first 2 years. So we held it at Lot 42, and this year we're going back to the original plan. And we really want to make this big. We again are setting this up as a collaborative. And so we're looking to community groups, organizations, companies to run events under this big umbrella called True North. We will also run events ourselves. But this is the way that we're going to get to 5, 10, 20,000, 50,000 people, is to actually, turn this into a big community initiative. And the support that we've had from the city and from the BIA and from organizations up and down King Street has been overwhelming. So we're very, very excited about the opportunity to actually execute against our original strategy. As far as the Communitech as an organization, we just spent the last 18 months doing a review, an outside-in review that's called the McDonald Report. And from it, we retooled our organization. We launched new sets of programming. But really what we're focused on is this notion of growth. How do we help people grow their companies, and how do we help them grow faster? And so when we think about that, it's growth in our companies, our community, and our economy. So with that, I just want to take an opportunity again to thank you very much for your investment and support over the years and for your ongoing partnership. We are thrilled with what we've been able to achieve together, and we're certain that we would not have been able to achieve what we've been able to achieve if it weren't for strong partners like the City of Waterloo. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian. Questions for the delegate? If not, I have one regarding scale-ups. I was actually surprised to see the number of scale-ups in there, like 225.
Yeah.
So it's 225 companies. Tell me a bit about what you define as a scale-up. How do they get into that quote program, and what you're doing for them? What might be some of the ultimate goals?
So it's a healthy ecosystem is a funnel where you've got a lot of net new companies each and every year, and then they grow and they graduate to that next level. And when we first started our work 15 years ago, our funnel had completely collapsed because of the dot-com bust. And so really what we've been through as a community is a 20-year story of rebuilding from scratch to get to a point of a healthy funnel. And now the companies that are at scale up right now are between 7 and 10 years old, which is actually how much time it does take to get to that stage. The opportunity that we have right now, and why we're so excited about the next 5 years, is that for the first time since the late 1990s, we have a stable of high-growth firms that have got potential of hitting $100 million in revenue, going public, big acquisition opportunities, and that will make a substantive impact on our community, because every time there's an event like that, we have more investors, we have more philanthropists, we have people who have been through a full cycle. And the other thing that's exciting about where we're at right now is that of those 200 and some companies, over 90% are first-time entrepreneurs. And as things occur, and if there are acquisitions, then a lot more of these people are going to be second-time entrepreneurs. And we know that second-time entrepreneurs, they move faster, they think bigger, they don't make the same mistakes, they've got a much higher probability of success. And we've seen that with what we call the Pickstream Mafia in town, the number of companies that came out of Pickstream over the years, and people just keep going back and doing it again and again, which leads to more startups and more money and more opportunity. So we're very excited. The way that we define our scale-ups is over $5 million in revenue, so 5 to 100, and the goal is how do we get 15 of them to 100 by 2025.
No, wonderful, because I think certainly it's nice to have all our large-scale enterprise companies, but seeing 225 scale-ups certainly provides us resiliency in our community in case something happens.
Yeah.
Any questions of Ian? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm going to leave copies of Blackberry Town for the members of council and for the CAO if you've not had an opportunity to read it. It's a good read by our very own Chuck Howlett, so thank you again for letting me the opportunity to appear today.
Welcome. Thank you. Now we move into staff presentations. It's the community services business plans. Let's make sure we get Councillor Bonagor back. And with Commissioner Mark Dykstra leading the charge on behalf of all his team.
Yep, good afternoon, Council. Here to provide the overview of Community Services Business Plan. As noted there on the screen, we develop and promote programs, facilities, and spaces for recreation and community activities for all citizens. We ensure that heritage in our community is nurtured and celebrated, and we take active measures to provide a safe and secure community by safeguarding the lives and property of residents and the public. Our mission statement and what we do here at the City of Waterloo is noted there. We embrace that mission statement along with a staff philosophy of let's explore as new initiatives come forward, as well as recognizing that each member, what they do, it matters and contributes to that overall mission philosophy. As an overview, our business plan builds to advance the city's strategic plan. Our plan is built to advance the relevant master plan for the department, such as the Older Adult Strategy, Waterloo Park Master Plan, or even the Fire Master Plan. Our plan is built to respond to the climate emergency. Our plan recognizes that there are opportunities for service improvements. We can do things better, and we recognize that with this plan. Our plan informs council and the public how we will utilize resources entrusted to us, whether it's a base budget consideration or advancing a service level from operating impacts or growth, as well as infrastructure investment. We recognize that strong teams and public input, will equal wise investment in community impact. My presentation will outline the divisional initiatives. It'll speak to our measures and targets for success and highlight our past community impact stories. Our team is here of directors and managers, myself. They will be available to answer questions at the end. As we get into it here with our first division, community program and outreach services, drivers and projects for this cycle, focusing on implementation around the older adult strategy, whether it's a review of the programs we currently do or looking towards how the Ontario health teams need to be supported by our work and how we need to connect with them. That's in that initiative. With respect to the museum, two key drivers there we want to move forward on in terms of the strategy, and that's the museum collection and the storage needed for that, and as well dedicated website. Looking for that website that goes deeper to provide searchable inquiries, support the novice person who's a historian interested in maybe their family history, or the peer group who wants to borrow some of our artifacts. We'll be working in that area. In terms of the neighborhood strategy, significant investment last term and with the strategy being built in the last budget to advance that. But we want to go deeper to build the stronger and connected neighborhoods. And there again, whether it's the proposal for web portal enhancements or loaning of equipment for events, we want to foster that. We'll be doing some asset mapping within that area as well. The last bullet speaks to our need and council's desire for a focused equity and inclusion strategy to be developed. So we're really setting the roadmap specific to that pillar within the strategy. Consultation, community, council, even staff will be part of that discussion. In terms of measures, definitely looking at those links to those initiatives, whether it's how we respond to older adult programming, measures around the museum, as well as those community and neighborhood measures. All with a focus on our strat plan and the corporate plan, and really leveraging where we've been and where we're going with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We want to target those within that area specifically. In terms of community impact, as I noted, some great stories coming out of the team, and we're connecting with the residents and people of Waterloo. But first one speaks to outcomes from the neighborhood strategy, where we've developed those teams. And one of the members says it really provides more opportunities to build neighborhood connections, and that's what we're doing with those works. As well, with respect to the museum, we have many visitors, and that amount is growing, and we're connecting with a range of users. But someone notes an excellent spot to learn something new. Even myself, when I was up there recently, learned about food preservation and how to do that with, within for my own household even. So some learning points there, even as I visited. Another story I just want to pause on with council is that came to me personally. I received a phone call one day from a gentleman and said he would like to meet with me. He didn't indicate why, and he said he would let me know when he arrived. So, yeah, so a little bit of uncertainty there when I received that call, but I said, hey, we'll take the good, the bad, and we'll either way we'll move forward with that. But what he expressed to me hit me significantly, but he wanted to provide the utmost thanks to the city and council for running our day programs at the Adult Rec Center. He went on to note, and he went through a lot of detail, but just in summary, it enabled him and his wife to remain in their home and provided them with both needed respite to deal with the changes in life. So really significant, and he wanted to pass on the thanks to council, and he'll do that today. This meant a lot to me because he took the time out of his schedule, he came over, he wanted to sit down and connect, and so the importance of doing that is significant. And, that's one story specific to this division. You'll hear some more that are just as impactful and relevant for the rest of the divisions. In terms of recreation services, lots of work in that area and community facing with all their facilities. And key driver to make sure WMRC, the rec complex, as it advances into construction over the next couple of years, that we have a solid operating plan and program plan behind the scenes, and that's being prepared in this business cycle. Broadening to our other facilities, the next bullet speaks to making sure the equipment in those other facilities is in good condition as well. And whether it's a backboard or some mats or even bleachers, we want to look at providing good, solid infrastructure for folks. Also noted in the details there, a sustainable lens is being considered and looked at with that project. Supporting our tourism and Waterloo sports hosting office really speaks to the collaboration amongst our provincial partners, regional partners, and other cities and townships that we want to advance, and really around sport hosting capability and capacity, whether it's unified bids that we're planning for and delivery, that's all part of that exercise and that initiative. The last one speaks to offering expanded hours for warming and cooling centers, and that's whether it's their current facilities, new facilities that come on board, whether they're splash pads, that's part of looking at how we can support that emergency response plan, not only from a facility point of view, but from a staff point of view is being investigated. Some great measures here that showcase the work of the team and where they want to go as well. The first one speaks to our links to the ActiveNet investment that Council has supported us on, and really getting those online registrations versus the in-person registrations. And we're tracking that. We're already at 60% with that. We want to go further and deeper with that. As well, the next piece speaks to program registration, and we want to make sure the right programs are there for folks and that we can deliver on those, and we'll use metrics to analyze that. Prime ice, a key asset in terms of ice in our facilities. We want to understand how we're achieving that 85% target and providing that for the service. We heard a little bit from the last presenter about startups and how the links to our community are strong. Pickup Hub really speaks to that collaborative approach. Where we have support for the Carl Leagues, an online platform where you can come and pick up a group of people and you can play at one of our facilities. So we've seen year over year 10% growth. We want to see that continue, and the team's measuring that. Online conversion of interest, that really speaks to the team's interest in digital marketing to share the story about our assets and then drive those into actual registration. So they're trying to see how their work on the digital end of things can translate into people coming to our facilities. In terms of visits to facilities, you can see a great benchmark there and a great story with the Ontario Volleyball League Championship, where we see 900 teams coming from across the province with all those 35,000 spectators coming. So significant community impact, economic value as well. We've also dealt with neighborhood community impact and addressing how things like parking, access, all of those pieces are part of the plan the team works on. The next impact story speaks to one of our facility attendants doing their daily work on an hourly basis when they go and clean and resurface the ice. In the evenings, maybe afternoons, more kids and families around, but we have That activity is of interest to some, and on one occasion, some of the kids were waving at our operator. He waved back, engaged him multiple times. We got a note back from one of the parents and noted that for all the kids and parents, that's made our day. So the small things our team does even makes a difference. Moving on to environment and parks, parkland strategy implementation, number of items in the budget that speak to that work. First quarter, we'll hear from the team on the outcomes from that study, and we'll advance that. Working on some significant parkland development, both in the Northdale area and as well in the Uptown with Alexandra Park. Theme that we're well aware of is ensuring park infrastructure renewal is front and center. So all those various areas that we see investment in the capital budget, whether it's Waterloo Park, Silver Lake, Bechtel Park, as well as our cemetery as well, all part of that infrastructural theme and advancement within that division. Where we want to see measures and outputs understood is around customer service, and that's in the lens of our fields, both diamonds and fields, and how that can be a measure of how well we're doing. The other piece, the next bullet there, speaks to wait times for tree pruning. We've got a significant tree canopy. We have residents who properties are right adjacent to that tree, and they take great ownership, or they love and passion for that tree, and we deliver a service in caring for that with them and for them. And we want to make sure we understand how we're providing that service in a reasonable and fit manner. Environmental sustainability and leadership on the waste diversion front in our parks, and want to understand how we can move forward with some of our dog waste initiatives, our bins and cans, and how those fit into our response to climate change. Urban tree canopy, building on the theme of carbon sequestering and how we support that, and we want to understand what the measures are around that currently and where we want to drive some targets are noted. In terms of community impact, same theme as planting, gives you a sense of all the close to 1,200 plus native trees, shrubs planted by the group, as well as the stewardship links that we have on so many fronts with the community, whether it's the link to Earth Day and the folks that come out to support that, our Bee City initiatives, our Partners in Parks initiatives that we have as well, a number of activities there that support the local park, a woodlot as well. Moving on to facility design and management. Great to see consideration for this building as well, interior, exterior, but we need to look at the age of the building, both the mechanical and electrical. You've seen some of the mechanical needs in recent months with some of the repairs that have been done, but also we want to make sure we're accessible. We're looking at safety as well as technology in this building as well. Getting to the heart of matter around climate change and where we want to significant energy councils given direction, and the green building, the policy that has been worked on, but this initiative really drives the target for 80% reduction by 2015 from our 2011 levels. But this is where we'll do those site-specific assessments, start that vision process for what we need to do at those buildings, and then drive those targets. Very exciting, and Council's well aware of the work at both WMRC and the East Side Library. So the team that's responsible for that area is busy doing a lot of the tender work at this point and moving those projects forward, and then there'll be significant efforts to manage those and deliver on those projects. So a key undertaking on a bigger scale. On a lesser scale, we note the Button Factory, our community arts center, in need of an elevator, and there it supports accessibility. In terms of measures related to our energy usage, that's where these drivers really come forward and are before council and part of the team's workload to understand what we use, and then our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions and where we want to drive those changes. Service level, just pausing on that one, just the importance of the investment council has in maximal understanding our work order. So each building, there's a need to repair, fix, change something, whether it's a light bulb or an area needs painting as well. And using this sort of platform to help us understand preventative maintenance, as needed maintenance, unplanned maintenance, and emergency as well. So the team's done a great job to start that process. We want to continue that on as well to make sure we're delivering good service as we repair our various buildings. In terms of community impact, I reference the design input to meet our community needs, and we've had some significant consultation with both facility expansions, both at the Rec Complex and for Eastside Library, and this really speaks to a desire for a listening ear to hear how we should create these spaces. It has gone deeper in terms of input. We have a great community with a lot of knowledge, and where we've got insights on whether it's building envelope technology, energy efficiency technology, accessibility, and even on some aspects of washroom design. We've taken those, and the community's heard. They've added to that, learned from some of the conversations they have, and want to now implement those inputs into the build. So that's great to see from their end, and a great story for Waterloo. Moving on to fire rescue service, a number of key drivers there for the team there. And we look at advanced and integrated software being a number of fronts. The voice radios where they communicate, the dispatch system that we rely on to get our vehicles to the location that somebody's calling into, and customer records management system, both for the civilian and our staff or first responders. We want to make sure we're up to speed on the technology there. Referencing the fire master plan in the past, we want to work through a work plan with council in this first quarter, advance that, but really look to see where we are in terms of responding to our boundaries growing, both to the edges, but also as well as in height too. So that's important to understand, and the teams will be working on those considerations. In terms of business continuity, education, and planning, it really speaks to the climate adaptation plan that council's approved in the last year, and really speaks to work needed to support whether it's prevention, preparation, response, and even recovery during an emergency. And so we need to be focusing on that, and the team plans to do that in this business cycle. Number of measures in terms of response call time, medical intervention, the public education, our inspection process, and even our asset pieces that will be measured and understood and used to help inform and make decisions. In terms of that medical oversight, last budget, council provided investment to support the training and medication for overdoses and for allergic reactions, and gives the crews a quicker opportunity to support those right when the call goes out and upon arriving on site. As well, on that emergency preparedness front, Alert Waterloo has been supported, and we've have that system now to do call-outs, so that's a great opportunity to engage community in a time of need. Looking into municipal enforcement, yes, Director Turner's noted some of the links, and I'll just, from the previous presentation, but really those community safety initiatives speak to what they're looking to do in this budget cycle. And, whether it's out front dealing with some enforcement issue, and it's related to a parkland we own, on-street items, safety zones around schools or the larger gatherings we may experience. They want to ensure that they're dealing with public safety foremost and providing that. And it really speaks to the next bullet around public education and awareness, to educate, to inform, to advise, even the rotating population that we have on a yearly basis of what some of the rules are, whether it is anti-idling or other rules or around nuisance, noise, lot maintenance as well. That's all part of that education piece. In terms of customer service and technology, and this is where giving staff the tools that they need to do their job, we want to provide that. And whether that's staff in the office, behind the scenes, or our officers right on the scene, we want to give them the support and training that they need to do their job. We also want to advance technology on a couple of fronts, whether it's the online platforms to give people the ability to call in and or be online and apply for that permit or license. So we're focusing there in a number of areas. In terms of metrics, they all relate to those initiatives, whether it's understanding our response rates, our number of public education outreach events, public feedback in terms of the usefulness and relevance of the information. We may think we're hitting the mark, but we want to get the feedback to make sure if we can do a better job. We can track those alignments with neighborhood strategy, and want to note a strong alignment with this division with our community program and outreach. As well, are we successful with those online services? And then also look to respond to 24/7 needs, and some pilots are proposed in that area to provide a greater level of service for those off-core hours that we operate under. In terms of impact, yes, we would say from a barbecue point of view and as a community outreach, whether it's at the McGregor Albert Community Barbecue, and that one really focuses on connecting those short-term residents with the long-term residents. We want to enable that. In terms of another impact, we've worked with council on approval for the AMPS program, and we've seen some great success. And this is where parking violations can be addressed, debated with our front counter staff versus going to court. And you can see provided 90% reduction from the formal action in the first 6 months. So really great to see that and moving that along. I will conclude my remarks at this time, and appreciate council's the opportunity to share with council an overview of our business plan, and the directors and myself are available for questions at this time.
Thank you, Mark. It was great to hear that heartwarming story about the man who came in to see you, but with your desk at the front door, it made me suspicious that you're actually letting through the rest to the third floor and just taking all the good ones into your office there, so maybe just intercepting all the good news stories on us. Questions for Commissioner Dykstra? Councillor Freeman, Councillor Bonagor, Councillor Hanmer, Councillor Vasek.
So again, I'm just going to ask, is now the time to ask questions related to items within the budget for your department, or? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, so a couple things more broadly. I did want to point out to all of staff that there are a lot of pieces within your budget lines that actually relate to some of the targets that we're trying to achieve through bike-friendly platinum. So there's some bridge replacements, there's new trails that are being constructed within our park spaces. When we look at Silver Lake and the renovation of Silver Lake, and that we're going to be building an active transportation corridor along that north edge, I'm really hopeful that as we move forward as a city, that we can look at those items as they reside within different sections of the city and allocate them towards a bigger story that we're trying to tell around active transportation. I got one of those lovely nasty grams by email this week about how it is that I allocate resources to clear bike paths, something I care about, but I don't clear areas for pedestrians. And I thought, well, I didn't actually think that too many cyclists use the bike paths. I think that our majority usage is pedestrians. So again, I think it's that storytelling, right? About that when we build these pathways, they're actually part of a much larger network. And I can't help but think of all of the investment that was made in the park next to Moses Springer and how critically that important that is to our active transportation corridor. So I just, that was a broader comment that I was hoping that I could share. With regard to the item 228, which is the west side land acquisition, I gather that's a bit of a placeholder. Is that correct? that if opportunity presented itself for land acquisition for sports fields, that that's a placeholder of that capital dollars?
Through the mayor to the Councillor Freeman, that is correct.
So one of my questions around that is recognizing that school boards can hold land within a planning application. So they can request that land be allocated for school placement. Is there any opportunity for us to do that as a city? Like when we're undertaking our park strategy and we know where we need to grow capacity, do we have any tools like that, or can we start thinking about creating tools like that?
So I can start off, and maybe Mr. Rapp can just add in from a planning perspective. But schools undertake through the planning process, understand where they need to invest in a new school, and they go through that process. At a certain point in time, if they feel it's not their needs, there could be an opportunity for us to pick up that school if they've acquired it already, or there's a discussion with the developer. So where there are, with that consideration for additional lands, any opportunity, whether it's school board or other institutions, we have that sort of lens that we're looking at to see what we can acquire and whatever sort of arrangements through other partners we can. We will definitely do that. So I don't know if any is further to offer, Commissioner Rapp.
Sure. Through through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Freeman. There's a couple of different options. It depends on the parcel of land in question and the timing of when the planning approvals were secured. If it's an older school site, I'm saying 20 years ago or longer, the school board would have purchased it and thought that maybe they may or may not need a school. If they decide they don't need to, it could be offered out in the public, and we would be in the pecking order, and we could try and work out an arrangement based on price with the school board. For most modern sites, the school board simply holds the property in reserve. And once they've made a decision, typically it's about 5 years from the registration of the plan of subdivision, then if they choose not to purchase it, then it is released back to the original developer. So again, it depends on where and when the property received its approvals, if that answers your question, Councillor.
Well, for clarity, I wasn't really talking about how the school board reserves land. What I was talking about is whether or not we, as a municipality, can reserve land within a development application, recognizing our needs, not just for green space, but maybe our needs for actual programming space. So I know that we have parkland dedication. I know that we take land for building community playgrounds within a subdivision development. But what I'm talking about here is whether we can reserve under that similar lens as a school board for our actual programming needs that we need for broader things like soccer or football or whatever.
Certainly, again, through the mayor, what we would need to do is to establish the need through our policy framework in the OP and the secondary plan as a demonstrated need through that planning process. When that has been established, then upon applications, and depending if it meets the criteria that would be laid out in the policy, we would then try and secure some of the land or a complete parcel. And then it would fall into the negotiation of the land price. But we'd have to establish that through the planning policy framework before we'd likely have any success.
All right, well, I'm going to leave that with staff, but I think that that's an interesting opportunity that maybe we haven't explored to the extent possible when we know where we really need land. With regard to items 229 and kind of within a bracket around there, it's related to funding of new playgrounds. And, you know, when we approved, I don't know, some extraordinary amount of money to rebuild Mary Allen Park, certainly I was of the understanding, and it was repeated to me, that design was going to be reused at other parks so that we wouldn't have to incur that level of expense. So the $1 million number for Andale Park is Alexandra Park, I'm having a hard time with that number, so I'm just going to leave that with you. And then when I compare that to an investment at Rosalie Park of $85,000 and Roger Street at 366,000, I'm really missing some balance here, and I'm really struggling with it a lot. We've spent a lot on parks in the uptown, and I know they're important, but $1 million is a lot of resources. And earlier I heard a conversation about it being a very narrow park, and so I need to say that right now. And to be honest, like, I'd rather see some of those resources allocated towards staff resources and financial resources to getting maybe, a mini splash pad down somewhere where we hadn't anticipated it, or, some new playgrounds that we've recently acquired. With regard to item 239 and the artificial turf, as many people know, kind of my second office tends to be a booth at the Daily Grill. And the owner of the Daily Grill is very involved with the Waterloo Minor Soccer Association. And he has a great passion for reminding me how much value a dome over those artificial fields, or at least one of those artificial fields, could be to the broader minor soccer association. And I don't know, like, we've got rules in our planning framework with regard to doming properties. I don't actually think we allow it in the city, but I just didn't know whether, in conjunction with undertaking this rebuild of the turf, whether we should be starting to think about some kind of opportunity around a temporary structure there. I don't know what the pressures are indoor fields, and so I think that it would be important to get a sense of the need and whether or not it's just one person's passion to see it have built, or whether there's a real commanding need for that. But if I could leave that with you, I'd like to do that. And I think that, I think the piece around the museum storage and the acquisitions, it seems like a really big number. So I think it's going to help me to get more details on that down the road. To be acquiring, almost 500 objects in recent years, it's just extraordinary. And I wonder then whether we're in the business of doing that kind of business, right? Because that's an awful lot of objects that are coming our way, and I don't know. I think the usage was 8,000 people. I think history is really important, but at the same time, I think that it's about balance, right? So we were talking about balancing spending of enforcement resources on idling, or spending them on increasing capacity around getting cars off the road. And I think that we might need to think that way too, and or different ways to leverage what we do, like maybe our neighborhood strategy. Maybe we can help bring people through that strategy through the museum. I don't know what it looks like, but I'm just really struggling with, the number is equivalent to about a 1% tax increase. So, and I know that it was in our museum strategy, and I'm not trying to rain on this particular parade, but I am worried about it, and I think that if I don't share that, it would be unfair to the broader budget process.
Through Mayor to the councillor, those items noted, the team can provide some response in advance of the capital budget day that's quickly approaching, so we can provide some additional information on all those items. They have those pieces well in hand at this point, but we can go a little further in advance of that meeting.
I wanted to also say that under achievements, I thought it was a big achievement this year that our parks team really embraced the mountain bike race at Bechtel Park, and that they really made that happen. And it was a totally new opportunity for the city. And I'd like to highlight those to, when opportunity presents itself, to highlight the things that we did differently, that we thought differently about, and how we created new partners in those pieces.
Thank you. To Councillor Bonagor, I think, over to Councillor Bonagor, but I think in terms of the parks, I think I remember Mary Ellen Park, I think that was $500,000 just in remediation of the old factory that was there. So a lot of money just in remediation. Councillor Bonagor.
Thank you, through Mayor Jaworski. Thank you for all of the updates, Mr. Dykstra. I do have a few questions. I'll start with the broad ones and then I'll go down to the line items. Broadly, when we're looking at municipal enforcement, we do hear a lot from residents regarding monitoring of parking, of idling, of sidewalk snow clearing, and dealing with these issues, which leads me to ask, do we have the right complement of people focused on the appropriate issues? So my question is really, what could, not saying that anything like this would happen, but what could a reallocation of funding or some increase in funding for a bylaw, what could it do?
Yes, through the mayor to the councillor, I'm going to kick it off and then ask Director Turner to step up. But focusing on that technology piece is one area where they're leveraging dollars to help advance and give the tools to the staff to deliver on whether it's quicker responses or be able to work through the issues. I know we've had some discussions on enhancing sidewalk snow clearing, and there's some potential enforcement and education opportunities we see as staff. We've talked amongst the divisions where we could see some investment in that area from council to help drive that one. But I'm going to turn it over to Shane to see if for his further insights.
Certainly, through you, Mayor Jaworski. Mr. Dykstra already mentioned the fact that one of the things we're doing, before, just in advance of the specific answer, what we're looking at is increased leverage of the use of technology to allow officers to do more enforcement and inspections out in the field. So they get more mobile technology and monitoring in real time of receiving and monitoring complaints in real time, so that we've got we've got more assets out on the street than focusing on the administrative stuff. But in terms of since the question's on the table, in terms of actual officer resources, I think that our key focus would be on having the agility to move around depending on season to season what the issues are, so that as opposed to specifically putting increased resources in one area or the other. I think it'd be important to understand that we have challenges in different areas of the city or different issues throughout the year. So I think that that would be our area of focus. I mean, it's, be honest, it wasn't a question I was prepared to answer today, but it's certainly something that we would have to look at in terms of what are the needs at any given time, what are the emerging trends. We certainly know that there's a couple of times a year, being September and March, when we've got increased challenges in certain areas. So I think the resources would be best allocated in a way that is flexible and mobile to increase our capacity at any given time on a particular issue. We certainly have our winter issues, we have our spring and our summer and fall issues.
And just to circle back on that, the point you made about having mobile tech to keep staff in the field longer, that's actually included. That I recall reading about that in the budget. So there's space for that in the budget already. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or there's a request already in the budget for that.
Yes, actually, the dollars that we're looking to leverage are capital dollars that have already been approved, and you won't see them in this forecast because they actually came forward in 2019 for the 2019 budget.
Okay, thank you. I suppose this will probably go back to Mr. Dykstra. So just with municipal enforcement again, when you were presenting your business plan, you were looking at the success metrics. I didn't seem to see anything there in terms of reducing or improving response times to public complaints. Did I just miss something?
Yes, one of the last ones speaks to the desire for that after-hour response. And so from our core hours, we want to improve the ability to respond after the core 8 to 4 hours. So the ability for someone to call our offices, not get a voicemail in response that we have to wait for a queue for the officer to return or for the next day of business. That's where we want a focus to increase. That's where there's a capital budget request to support a pilot initiative with our dispatch center to get more of a first-hand person there that can hear the request, respond to it, help prioritize, and knowing what the officers are doing, saying this is an urgent matter, you need to deal with this one next. So an internal sort of triage system with the issue. So that is within there, and that's a metric that was one of the last ones on the business plan.
Is there a goal or is there a target attached in terms of, like, I know when we have a big snow event, it can quickly become days until a bylaw officer can get to a particular problematic patch of sidewalk. So, like, will we be seeing an actual target?
I'm going to invite Shane back again. Their team has been talking about this, so I'm going to let him expand a little further.
Certainly, through you, Mayor Jaworski, one of the slides that Mr. Dykstra had indicated was that we are planning on tracking not just our response times, but the time it takes to resolve an issue. And I think it's important to understand that the nature of our business is that we'll have a series of targets. In some cases, we could be looking at a response and resolution time of a couple of hours, depending on what the issue is, and in some cases it could be days or weeks, depending on whether or not it's a more in-depth zoning or property standards matter. Industry standards across Ontario in terms of the challenge is we have no benchmarks to work with, so we're going to establish our own benchmarks.
Okay, thank you very much. Just getting it, I'll leave municipal bylaw enforcement for now, so thank you, Mr. Turner. One of the other broad issues in your business plan, it was talking about looking at the warming and cooling centres. I just wanted to make sure, these warming and cooling centres are often needed in times of community stress. There are the heat waves, or there are blackouts during ice events. I'm just wondering, does this plan include funding for additional training for staff or additional support for staff who would be dealing with the public in those times of stress?
Yes. Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Bonnegar, it's in kind or within our budget processes right now. So we've got that covered. We've got resources, whether it's within fire services that we're using, broader regional partners that can support that. Current staff team, management team would advance that initiative. So it's we have the resources. They're covered. In terms of day-to-day operation, we'll ramp up. We'll deal with those emergency situations as they arise, but it's both on sort of, we know those summer issues and winter issues occur. We're going to look into that, but right now on an emergency side, we cover that and within our existing means and contingencies that we have available right now to council.
Great. Okay, thank you. Just wanted to check. So digging down to a few specifics, we've got line 252, that's the Waterloo Park Master Plan implementation. This provides kind of annual funding for projects that would move along the master plan, but there are additional lines for Waterloo Park for separately listed projects such as Silver Lake, the splash pad, a new bridge, parking changes at Father David Bauer Drive. So I'm just wondering, given all of those projects coming up in the park, what does line 252 cover? What kind of things would we be seeing there?
I'm going to ask Director Silcox-Childs to come up and provide an overview of that initiative. We've got the 252. I have the project sheet here, Jeff, if you need it. Is it there? Yep.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. To answer the councilor's question, so any very large capital projects are identified separately for Waterloo Park, and that includes bridge crossings and different things like that. There's a number of smaller projects that are all sort of lumped together, and they're coming out directly out of the Waterloo Park 2009 master plan. Each year, staff and the WPAC, or the Waterloo Advisory Committee, they prioritize and they look at all of those different little projects, and they come forward to council, usually in March, with their recommendations on priorities to be implemented through that 252 line.
That is great. Now, I understand that the master plan will be updated. So how does the money to implement this master plan intersect with the creation of a new updated master plan? Just want to make sure that we're all going in the right direction all the time.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm understanding the question exactly. Could you repeat it, please?
So I was speaking with Mr. Dykstra about the Waterloo Park master plan, and there are a number of projects that are kind of set for after that master plan is updated. So I just want to make sure that, so once we have a new master plan, it's I just want to make sure that this money that we're spending here is still going to align with, it's hard to predict, but what a new master plan is likely going to call for.
Yeah, and I'll start off the discussion here. That's a goal with any plan that we take, that we can dovetail the work that's been done to date with where we want to go with the changes. And over the years I've been in the roles here, we've seen that success, and I am, in a positive frame of mind that will continue. The investment into certain things are linked to whether it's active transportation, our stormwater management, overall philosophies, our urban canopy. So those investments are not lost. Where those master plan driven initiatives connect with that, they'll continue to those broader ones. Where some need to stop, we do have those discussions with the public and council, and then we go in a new direction. So we're well, I think, informed to be able to navigate a new direction.
Excellent, thank you. This is all just setting my mind at ease as we're going towards the big budget day, just so you understand.
Thank you.
So the next question is for the Button Factory elevator. That's line 277. It's $500,000 thereabouts from what I recall. And I'm just wondering, does that include funding to create an accessible washroom on the upper floor so that our efforts to improve accessibility are actually supported by the infrastructure on that level?
Good afternoon, Councillor. No, that the funding that we have doesn't have allocation for washroom. It's only exclusively for elevator.
Is that then, so for you, Mr. Dykstra, is that something that, for me as a process question, should I be, like, is that something that the Button Factory Arts would implement as the tenant of the building, or is that something that we would need to look at as the owner of the building?
Yeah, we should do that, but we don't have that plan right now.
We're investment into our buildings is a key discussion for council these days, and that's where overall understanding how accessibility fits into that reinvestment needs to be part of that discussion. So we have assets that need to be maintained, both mechanical and electrical, but as we get into those buildings too, where there's opportunity to improve them, and with the key goal of the accessibility improvements, we need to have that front of mind and be focusing on that too. So there's a couple of line items for accessibility within the budget, not covering all the needs as we need to move forward and do more work in that area, but and that supports infrastructure investment as well.
So should it be required, like should we decide that we do want to supplement the elevator with an accessible washroom? Is there another line in the budget that could cover that as accessible facilities?
We have a general allocation across the city wherever we have accessibility, but the amount that has been allocated for the entire city wouldn't be sufficient just to go in there. The funding is very limited in there. We will be spending all our funding only at one spot. Unless we have a dedicated line, it will be hard to so there is no dedicated line elsewhere other than the general program of addressing AODA compliances.
Okay, this gives me a little bit of concern. I'll just leave it at that. All right. I may follow up with you afterwards, Mr. Dykstra, if I want to find out some more about this specifically.
We're glad to go a little deeper on that and have a conversation so you understand more on that
Great.
area.
And thank you, Mr. Seaver. Thank you. So my next, I've just got a couple of more specifics. So one is regarding item 285, which is the Rim Park parking lot. I'm just wondering, is this the cost of reconfiguring the lot around the new library? And if not, I also point this towards my ward councillor for that area. Would it be reasonable to look for that project to be pushed out a year just to give the facility a chance to have a reprieve of construction?
Yeah, so great question on that front. Received a number of inquiries on that. So the overall site plan for the library expansion, if you recall in council, just focused on the end where the building was going to be built. But there is a plan to offer some more sidewalks that link to the corner of Park and University. So a whole loop I'm going to use around the front of the building to strengthen that pedestrian connection. We're also aware of the traffic congestion at a number of those intersections where you come into the site. You'll see that main island across from the facility be broken up with drive lanes to support more accessibility of the vehicles into that site. So that's part of the plan too. The resurfacing aligns nicely with the project. We part of that can appreciate where a lot of construction is fatigue for participants too, but if we can get it done quickly and in short order, our recommendation is to keep the timelines to just work through that in a timely construction framework.
Okay, so it includes like better access to the site as a whole, as well as better support for getting to and from the new library facility.
Correct.
Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you. And the one other thing is really to address one issue that's already been raised, which is the budget line that's allocated for Alexandra Park. I just wanted to check. So that budget line, it included a contingency for remediation, from what I understand. So is there a possibility that we may not end up using that whole budget? And if so, what would happen to the money from that line should we not end up using that entire budget?
Yeah, so I'm going to ask the director to come up further, but you're definitely on to where we're at with that and some of the needs with that remediation, but also some of the give back. So I'll ask Jeff to come up.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. The budget as it stands right now, it's about $1 million for Alexandra Park. We anticipate that there may be some savings there. We're still not 100% sure. The properties that were torn down, we're not 100% sure what's still in the ground. So we always want to keep a fairly high contingency for those unexplored subsurfaces and buried foundations or whatever might be there. However, we are very hopeful that there will be some savings there that we would like to reallocate elsewhere. And there's many other locations that it can go to. If I can put a plug in for playgrounds, I would take that opportunity now. Or splash pads.
So it would be like it could be redistributed kind of within the park's budget as required. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be our intention, and we'd work through our policies to reallocate based on the values, and if there's a project specifically that may need some extra funds, sharing that information for council per the policies to get decisions, we'd do that. Recognizing this one was a little higher, and the questions around that, the scope and scale and what was being delivered at Alexandra. Safeguarding some of the unknowns, but recognizing there's some good potential to redirect funds and support other initiatives within the park's budget.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And I think the only other thing I might say is I really want to make sure that to shift again to the city museum, if we are going to have a museum, I want to make sure it's really set up for success. So I would be very keen I'll be weighing up the plans that we have against the cost that it has, against the number of people who can visit the current location. So I don't have a question there per se, but I just wanted to flag that I really, is there a plan to kind of revisit the museum strategy in some way, or just to check in to against the museum strategy to make sure that that it's set up for success?
Great questions, and sensing a need for some additional conversation with council. I'm going to ask Mr. Bowman to come up and share some of the storylines along the museum front, where we see where we've been and where we're going. Just an overall sense, Mr. Bowman, where you see the museum, where it's been, and where you see it's going to be going in the future and relevancy to the community.
Certainly, through you, Mayor Jaworski. Originally, our museum was housed at the Clay and Glass Gallery, and we were not able to do a number of projects or programs or exhibits. When the opportunity came about to go to the Conestoga Mall, we talked to the mall, and there was a real need for us to have a unique experience there. In the next few weeks, you'll hear more from Karen's team about what has happened out there, but it's a real unique experience to go to a mall and then have that museum opportunity. The intent of the strategy was to give us that direction. Where do we want to go with all of this? And it's important to note and emphasize that the museum as such is in the public trust. We received these artifacts as part of an agreement many years ago. And the role that Mr. Seagram, which is the core of our museum artifacts, was a founder of this community, and I think it's important to emphasize that with our history, it helps us to know where we've been, to know where we want to go in the future, and as such, the role that this group plays out there allows people to come and visit and experience the past, whether it be stuff from Waterloo Park, whether it be stuff from the Seagram Museum, whether it be stuff from currently the tech world that we experience here in Waterloo. So that's the direction of the strategy, and part of that includes the request for some storage, because we must also remember that some of our artifacts are large. They include the Seagram truck that many of you have seen traveling down Oktoberfest. It also includes some artifacts that are currently located at CG as part of and within Shopify, so that those pieces belong to us, and our team goes over and maintains them on a regular basis. But at some point in time, if there is a opportunity or a need to, we could be asked to remove those pieces, and they still belong to us as part of the public trust. We have reached out, because we see storage as an issue, as part of that storage conversation, that with our fire department, so that we're trying to collaborate together to emphasize the importance of storage, where we could use our resources with our fire services, with our museum, to extrapolate a community-based a coalition, if you will. So that's where the museum has been. It's an important part of our dynasty and our history. We're very proud of it, and I think going forward, if it means that our strategy will be revisited in a couple of years, yes, most likely, to see where we're going with it, because things are changing all the time with us, and that includes the fact that we are seeing changes at the current Conestoga Mall, whereby the shops are now moving out. You heard of them recently. Carlton Cards left, and other places have left. So will this be a future opportunity for us to have a museum as part of our history and our heritage, if that helps?
Thank you. Hello, Councillor Hanmer. How are you? You're next.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. A lot of my detailed questions, my colleague Councillor Bonigar has asked, so thank you very much for that. I won't repeat those. I do have some broader general questions for you. You've got, there are a number of large projects underway or going to be underway within community services, and a lot of the what I'll call day-to-day kinds of activities are fairly significant too, in terms of refurbishing things or just doing some general maintenance and upgrade. Can you talk to us a little bit about the capacity within your portfolio to carry out all of these, and are there any areas of risk?
Yeah, appreciate the question. So one of my opening remarks speaks to strong teams plus that community input equals wise investment and impact. And the need for a strong team is needed. Facility design and management, one area to deliver on the projects there. We're at a really high performing point there. There is potential if one of the cogs maybe is not there for whatever reason, it'll put some stress on the team. So that's where we're looking at with this business plan in that area. There's a number of additional asks to support that division, and that will help alleviate some of the pressure in other areas for that. So if we have the build team, where the build team may get sidetracked in dealing with a tenant or rental issue, that's why we want to see the real estate person that has that special project management skills in that area to support that team and make that whole. We're asking for a supervisor supports the needs within that division to make sure we're not then drawing from one of the project managers to address the needs. So with the plan that we've provided, we've worked through some reorganizational areas in Sunda's area. This is a plan for that will help them to meet those objectives, and the goal is the high priority items and the lower priority items. The budget also speaks to a number of factors that supports that team using technology with the Maximo work to help with the work orders and drive that. All around, yes, we would like all of the areas, divisions, all the departments support to advance their work programs. That's one area where, based on the significance, the investment there would be great and help that team along. Within environment and parks too, a number of deliverables too in that area. There are a number of asks there to support the team, so we're not having cross-functional roles occur where we need project management, stick to that. Where there's supervision of staff to get items done, we're driving that. So the plan supports where we can go to deliver those big items and those smaller deliverables as well.
Thank you for that. I also, within the plan, is to look at business continuity, and it's framed right now in the context of something catastrophic happening. It almost suggests that just managing the projects also falls into that, because you've got to keep things moving. So it sounds like a good plan that's coming forward. Thank you for that. The other piece, and I've asked all of the commissioners the same question, and it's really more a statement and a plea to start looking at outcome measures versus output measures. And some of our areas lend themselves much more to that. Looking at Mr. Bowman, and specifically in anything that's health and social service related, the programming that we're doing, what's the difference we're making, or what's the difference we're trying to make, and getting us talking about targets also. That's one way that we can look at, are we really making a difference in the investments that we're making to move the needle, rather than just counting what we did. And I think there's lots of great things happening, but I'll just put that out with you to consider.
Thank you.
And my final area of questioning is around the fire expansion potential. And it's a little bit, and it may be more for the chief for this question, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg kind of thing, because we haven't had the master plan come forward yet. But yet we are taking a look, especially in items 304 through to 306, on some expansion pieces and allocating some dollars there. So I'm curious at this point just about the engagement approach, and specifically it's slated to be in my ward. So it's one of the few things that's happening in Ward 1. There's lots happening in Ward 1, but not so much in this budget, so that's okay. That's all right. But really wondering what kind of engagement is happening or will be happening with the community and with our neighboring communities about just what might go there, how it goes, etc.
So I'll defer to the chief. He's got those answers ready to go, because that's part of his plan, so I'll let him share that vision.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Handler. With respect to your comment about a possible or what would appear to be a chicken and the egg approach, the previous master fire plan that was completed some time ago, it earmarked for actually 2 fire stations to be looked at during that time, leading us in through to today. A lot has changed in the community since that time with respect to not only the leadership, but also the face of our community and the different response times that are required today. So in light of that, the reason why you're seeing in long-term capital that we are flagging, if you will, a fire station is that once we can consolidate all the information that we've gained as of date through the accreditation process, also through completing the fire underwriter survey in 2019, is that we do have data that shows us that we do have areas of interest that can potentially warrant a fire station on the west side that can help the entire community. It also means that with respect to the change in the community is that, as I mentioned, different leadership is that we're looking at really unique ways on how to respond to the community, all the different risk types and so forth. And we've innovated in some different ways through prevention, inspections, work that we do, in addition to recent response, such as adding a trailer unit for specialized rescue because of the pressures. Once we put it all together through a master fire plan, we will be bringing recommendations to council. And to add to your comment about engagement, we fully intend to engage the community to the greatest extent, working with Tony and his team in communications. We've been paying very close attention to the work that's been done with other master plans and how the community appreciates being engaged, the expectations of council, and to put that all together to ensure a safe community.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Next up is Councillor Vasic, Councillor Henry, Councillor Bodley.
Okay, through you, Mayor. Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks for all the back and forth ahead of time to answer some of my more detailed questions. Just a few items I want to pick up on, and again, a plug for parks. In Ward 5, Rosalie Park, if there is any money left over, we would welcome it. I know it's a small space, so you can only put a small little park there, but any add-ons would be welcome from the community. It's a really exciting project because the neighborhood is getting involved, and they've basically created a Facebook group. They've been around to the whole neighborhood distributing flyers, which is about 2,000 homes in that one area, to tell people about this so that they can fundraise to apply for a neighborhood matching grant. So it's really a whole bunch of departments coming together, and that's really exciting. So really excited about Ref 234. My question is around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission budget items. There's 25,000 in the capital budget every 3 years proposed, and 50,000 annually proposed for the operating budget. So really exciting to see it come to about 175,000 in the remainder of this council term. So congratulations to the team on doing all of that. And I'm curious, how do you see this investment being used?
So I'll kick it off and then ask Mr. Bowman to step in. But there's work to be done on the file with the operating dollars to really scope what is the plan. So I'll let Jim explain that. On the capital side, that's really around the placemaking opportunity that supports that. But I'll ask Jim at this point to come in and add a few other reference points there to help council with these two items. Jim?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. There are a number of calls to action from Truth and Reconciliation, of which I think there's about 96 in total that municipalities are required to adhere to. We're lucky in this area. We don't have all 96 to deal with, so we have a small number. These calls to actions basically are designed to reflect the role the municipality must play in a plan to work towards the direction of Truth and Reconciliation. So the fund, through council's strategic plan, we've seen this as a strong need, and we want to move towards that. So the funding for some of the programs would be used to promote small grants to support local Indigenous initiatives, be responsible, fair, and sensitive to some of those calls to action and some of those projects that may develop. One of the big areas, and it's been mentioned a number of times here today, has been funding for training. And training in this area is really going to be very important as the community, in order to meet the calls of action in itself, but also to demonstrate the relationship other municipal partners will play in all of this. And I believe we're working towards some kind of a training sessions in the next few months with our regional partners. It's important to support local initiatives from the Indigenous perspective. And we must respond effectively to the new corporate plan of belonging. So our role is going to be training, working with our Indigenous community members, working with our municipal partners, and working towards enhancing what the community can do to bring these calls to action to fruition. If that helps.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. I guess just a couple of things I'd like to say about those. It sounds like a great plan. My thought is just to encourage you to look at really innovative opportunities for training, things that we might not traditionally be thinking about.
Yes, we'll go as broad as we possibly can and bring in helpers, if you will, to guide us through this, because it's a very sensitive, but at the same time, it needs to be meaningful. And I think when we had the conversations with our corporate management team around the messaging, it needs to be meaningful for everyone.
Definitely. And related to that as well, meaningful and sensitive, and also I think a bit bold and not afraid to make mistakes. Like we're going to make mistakes and missteps. Yes. And so not to miss out on an opportunity because we might be afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. Yes. The idea is we will, and those are all opportunities for learning.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Yes. And then to tie in the TRC to the museum piece. It is a heavy investment for the museum, but what I really liked about what you said was it's important to tell our history, and that's so deeply tied to truth and reconciliation in terms of understanding our history as settlers and in the processes of decolonization. And so I think it's just something to add to the conversation about museums, to consider how the two work together.
It can be a tool for us, and we've already had some conversations with our Indigenous folk around that.
Right. Thank you. That was my main big question. Yeah. Plus Rosalie Park, more money. Just kidding.
We'll mark that down. Rosalie Park. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mayor, and certainly thank you to the team that's been responding throughout the last month or so to all of Council's questions. I think it's useful for us to have as much information as we can. I've got a couple of detailed level questions since we've dealt with a lot of high level. And I'll start, I think, with the chief, since he was up here earlier on the detail level, Commissioner Dexter. I saw inside the business plan and those opportunities and you just mentioned it, the insurance sort of underwriter survey that was finished last year. I think one thing that council may not appreciate, I know Councillor Freeman does from being around for past exercises on these, is that the costs of what fire service we do and do not provide are not just reflected in the property tax rates we charge, but also reflected in the insurance costs that individual property owners pay. And we don't always see the two numbers together in terms of understanding what the net costs for folks are and how those interplay. So I was wondering, looking at the prevention officer that you're requesting here, and the note about the backlog of outstanding files that are open. I'm wondering if we would expect that that increasing backlog of files is impacting on people's fire insurance costs, or could, and how increased investment that we might make in such a position could play out in terms of the insurance rates that people pay privately.
Through you, Chair Jaworski, Councillor Henry, thank you for your question. So with respect to the current backlog, in 2008, in 2019, we were showing that we were over about 3,000 files. We've got that down to about 2,500 at this particular time. If we do add the fire prevention officer, our expectation is most certainly that we would see an increase in available points for that particular area within the fire underwriter survey. Where that falls into is the fire safety control area of the underwriter survey review, and that accounts for about 20%, actually accounts for exactly 20% of the overall grading through fire underwriter survey, where in which case in that fire safety control piece, there's two categories that come into play. The first is codes and enforcement, where we have an available 260 points that we could get. In addition to the general program, we have about 190 points that are available for us to get, which would mean if we could increase those points, we would see or expect to see that there's better insurance rates, in particular for commercial, and those also translate to residential property, to my knowledge, with respect to. With the difference being is that in conversation with fire underwriter survey, they will not give us an actual dollar value for what we do. An easy way to explain that is that if, by example, a community hires an additional fire prevention officer, it's up to that prevention team and that officer in particular to make an actual difference. And that can't be proved until we come to a next review, and they do them about every 5 years. So that would mean that we would come back around at about 2023, 2024. Given that we're looking for that position in 2022, I expect there would be a difference. And in conversation with our Chief Fire Prevention Officer, he believes that we need about 2.5 years to reduce the files in such a manageable way, which would allow us to be very proactive, which would also help us for available points in grading. And the hope would be is that we would see, or property owners would see, a reduction in insurance rates.
I think that's happy to understand the connection and also the complexity and timing of the connection. But an investment on this side should see some throughput. If we, as Councillor Hanmer keeps asking on what the outcome looks like, I think there's the fire underwriters are looking for outcomes as well. And when they can measure them, then they can match them in terms of rates. So.
And we can actually measure those outcomes, and it's a great point, Councillor Hanmer, that you raised, and thank you, Councillor Hanmer, for revisiting that. If you look at some of the metrics, the outcomes of what prevention did, we would expect to see an increase in inspections and re-inspections completed, in addition to the outstanding files that I've shared with you, and as well addressing fire violations, fire code violations noted, fire safety plans and so forth. We would expect to see increases in those areas, again, reducing backlogs and really trying to move towards the outcome of a proactive approach to risk, which is what we're really trying to achieve overall through that division.
I appreciate that. Thanks. That's the question I had for you, Chief. And I know that I appreciate our Fire Preventions Division working through those backlogs, including making sure my building's fire safety plan was updated and everything was up to code, which happened a few years ago. And now I regularly, experience our active involvement of that plan on a monthly testing basis where I didn't before. So thank you and the team for making sure that my family has the stuff in place to be safe.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
As well as everybody in the community. In terms of municipal enforcement side, I saw something in the emerging trends piece, which gets at a conversation that I think Councillor Bonagor was getting at with the delegation earlier. And you had a term in there I wanted you to elaborate a bit more on, and that was one of the emerging trends is a shortage of willingness to participate in problem-solving exercises. I'm wondering if you could help council understand what that means and what the impact is on the service that we can provide the community in terms of upstream, effects and all the things we've talked about today so far.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski, I tried to wordsmith a way of saying that what we're seeing is an increased reliance on a large portion of the population, that increased reliance on municipal government to solve their issues without being part of the problem-solving process. In simple terms, it's about what I'm starting to see, what I've seen over a period of time is less reliance on communication between neighbors and neighborhoods, and more reliance on calling the city to resolve their issue. So I think, we can make some inroads In terms of that, and talking with our partners with that are driving forward the neighborhood strategy, that's actually something that came out as part of the neighborhood strategy, was the ability for neighborhoods to increase their capacity to problem solve. And so that's part of our public awareness and education piece that's strongly aligned to the neighborhood strategy piece, and that is making sure that people understand what it means to support a healthy neighborhood. And I don't want to go as rudimentary as saying, what does it take to be a good neighbor? But it's that type of thing. What does it mean to belong in a good neighborhood and a strong neighborhood? And part of that is looking at the opportunities to resolve issues before they become escalated. Because once they become escalated, they come on the city's forefront. And in my experience has been in bylaw enforcement. When enforcement gets involved, there's often a legacy that's left behind that can be somewhat negative in terms of, well, who called on me, or now then if I got a ticket, I want to make sure other people get tickets and that sort of stuff. And quite frankly, I mean, the increased expectations on municipalities has been and continues to be a challenge. And I think that there's ways that we can engage the community more. There's some great work being done in some of our neighborhood associations and some of our community groups, and we just need to be able to capitalize on that and grow that momentum.
I appreciate that, Mr. Turner. I think I know you were wordsmithing that, but given the conversation earlier and many of the challenges I know all of us face, it was useful sort of highlighting that neighborliness and trying to really build a strong Neighborloo is very important. I don't know if we can actually use that, but that's on all our taglines so far. It is going to be critical for us being able to focus your division on achieving key safety initiatives that we really need to hit, and not mediating nuisance behaviors and solving it without anybody being involved in the solution. So it's never permanent. I think that's not helpful. Did you have more to say on that?
I appreciate the conversation that council's engaging on, because this really speaks to in all areas, whether it's the neighborliness that a number of the divisions see in parks, but also being a good participant in our sporting activities that we're hosting. All those things talk about being a good citizen and supporting that, and tools that our team's bringing forward have in the past and want to moving forward are all part of that vision that we have, strong community services that we're providing.
Thank you. And then I have Sunda's inching because he knows I've got one for him on these kinds of pieces. I mean, if there's a strong theme from this budget, it is infrastructure renewal, and that's not just on the capital catch-up side, but also on the basic preventative maintenance that can keep us from having those large unexpected capital projects. So on page 64 of the business plans, you noted a few terms that I thought it would be helpful for us to understand. The first one is schedule compliance, and the other is planned maintenance. So can you give us a sense of what 40% schedule compliance and 23% planned maintenance actually means in terms of what we're seeing and what we're not seeing?
Thank you, Councillor Henry. These ratios somewhat need to be taken with a context. If they are looked at in abstract, it may not reveal the meaning of it. Essentially, if I say that one in one simple sentence, we are acting on a risk-based manner to sort of do the maintenance. Because of the lower ratios indicates that we are picking and selecting our work in order to minimize the risk. That tells two things. One is we do not have enough sufficient funding, and also we do not have enough resources. As just a simple math, I think it's above that line. I'll get to that meaning of it, but before I go there, there are 6,332 work orders processed. That means approximately a person minimum of 3 hours, and if you have got 10 staff in there, is 633 hours, 633 work orders into 3 hours, it is almost 1,900 hours per person to be spent in order to cover that. But the available hours for the entire 10 staff would be less than 4,000. You need to do the 0.76 ratio in order to get the effective hours. So essentially where it goes is approximately, just if we assume this is the exhaustive list of items that we are doing, even for that one we will be short of staff by at least a 2.5 FTE. But now coming back to the scheduled maintenance, what it says is that whatever that we have scheduled to do, we could not do that one on time. And the second one is planned versus unplanned. It might sound, they sound very similar, but they are different. Schedule means we don't schedule for, I can explain that one through an example. If a machine has to have a certain amount of maintenance work after 50 hours, the conveyor belt needs some maintenance work after 50 hours. We don't know when the 50 hours will be hit. So, but we know that is a known maintenance, but it cannot be scheduled. So that's a difference between the scheduled maintenance versus a planned, unplanned maintenance. Then the ratios we have indicates that we are short of staff. That's what it indicates.
So I take it from the math exercise that you sort of run through that the I4, which is the preventative maintenance, increase that we're seeing, won't get us all the way to where we'd like to be, but it'll bite off a substantial chunk of the preventative maintenance activity that we're not being able to schedule, and that'll help,
fair to say, yeah.
Help us get ahead of some of these problems. Okay, so the other one I have for you, Sunday, is, and this is picking up, I think, on where Councillor Bodley has been asking over the last little bit, in terms of making sure our net new infrastructure investments help us also achieve other goals, particularly sustainability goals. I know that we've got a specific funding line for the green building policy, but we've got many other funding lines to do all sorts of replacement of infrastructure across city facilities. Can you give us a sense of what the additional infrastructure dollars that are being requested here will be able to do in terms of our facilities, particularly through the lens of greenhouse gas targets and green building policy? Do we see these as topping up our green investments, or do we see them as sort of separate and not achieving those?
No, okay. It goes in both ways. We are topping up where we will supplement. For instance, in our capital program, you will see there are specific projects and there are programs like roof replacement program is a good one to sort of that we don't specify. It will take place every year. So that's a program, and that program will have to be supplemented with the green green building implementation policy funds in order to go to the next step, which is solar panel, installation of solar panel, or battery energy storage cells, purchasing an energy storage cells along with roof. Those are not part of the roof funding program, but we may have to pick where we want to spend the green building implementation fund in order to get the biggest return in terms of financial cost and also in terms of green energy reduction program. So it will be hard to sort of say at this point, but we have put some plans in place. So this year we are going to do the assessment of certain selected buildings in order to see where we have to spend to maximize our dollars or minimize our spending and maximize our greenhouse gas reduction.
And just, one last one on this, and I should have been asking all of our sort of key folks. If council, funds I-6 or whatever level that council funds increase infrastructure investment, all those project lines are non-routine, projects, and so will have to come back to council. From your vantage point for the facilities part, how much time do you think you'll need to be able to come back and tell us what those new dollars will sort of achieve over those three years? Is 6 months sort of reasonable? Do we think that we can be back here for everyone and tell us what those dollars are going to buy and what impact it's going to make?
Before I answer, I think Mr. Brad.
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Henry. So we have, that is correct, that the approval of I-6 on the agenda, which council is yet to see, will be tied with the approval of the 4 additional infrastructure renewal projects, and they are all classified as non-routine, which means they'll need to report back with the funding plan. We have been working with the various subject matter experts for the 4 asset groups: facilities, roads, IMTS, and parks, and it was believed that we could return back with those reports by the end of Q2 2020. So by the end of June, council will have a sense of what, in addition to the noted projects, are we getting for that additional investment. So one suggestion has been made that we also include asset management scorecards in those reports, so you can see the change that's being made in terms of the investment. So that is the plan, that we would report back by June of 2020.
I think you got your question for you. And the last one I have is I think more high level, and that's for my named counterpart, Mr. Silcox Charles. We always email each other as, "Hi, Jeff. Thanks, Jeff." Yada yada yada. But the last one I have is thinking about the growth that we can provide in terms of safe, sustainable transportation over this council term. I know we've got the region's running a separated cycling pilot, including over our roads. I know we've got a priority trail network that we have today. I was wondering if you could offer some comment on what, by the end of this council term, Waterloo might look like in terms of that priority network. What does this budget allow us to do, and what are some of the challenges you see as the region's pilot wraps up in terms of taking that on and going forward, so that we can sort of grapple with that understanding in our budget conversation?
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Jeff. Yeah, there's definitely challenges. Where I see us going in terms of the infrastructure, the pilot program that's running now, it's really just gotten off the ground. It hasn't been evaluated as of yet, and it certainly hasn't been evaluated over 4 seasons. Like these lanes are here year round. So we really need time to see what the true cost is going to be. My preference would be if we can request that the region maintain maintenance of those through their contractors throughout this budget cycle, to allow the municipalities time to understand the true cost, understand the community benefit, and I suspect that some changes are going to happen. I think that some of the pieces that we're looking at aren't working necessarily, and that's okay because it's a learning process. So I suspect that things are going to change and that we're going to see what the true cost is a little later on. So we need some time to figure that out. In terms of where I see us going within this budget, certainly through the Deloitte recommendations, and it's important to note that most of those recommendations, all of them actually, came about after the budget process was completed. So they didn't really align really well with this budget cycle per se. Some of the recommendations are kind of non-budget dependent or less budget dependent. So one of the things I'd like to look at is really understanding the priority of our networks over the next couple of years, and really understanding where people are using them, where the bikers are, where the pedestrians are, and trying to focus as much of our efforts in those areas as we can, And if we can lighten up on a couple other areas in order for us to do that, then let's consider that. Certainly one of the things I'd like to consider.
And I'll roll the question up to, I think, Commissioner Dykstra and maybe Commissioner Rapp on the sort of Deloitte study, because I did ask a question in advance to our Director of Transportation and then forgot to actually ask it here because it didn't be marked into my little system where I've been using for all this. And that was around, to the extent to which the audit implementation was funded in this budget cycle. And I know Jeff had just sort of said, well, it came after, so we didn't have anything earmarked for implementing that winter control audit review. But I'm wondering, from a commissioner perspective, if there are, how you see us trying to figure out how to advance those initiatives, including the ones that are monetary, in this budget cycle so that we can get the benefits from them, given we're not really seeing that represented in the budget before us. I'm wondering if you can help me see my way through to how we can gain the benefits of those systems, even though the timing wasn't perfect.
Ask Mr. Rapp to go first, leading some of the transportation initiatives, and he was the lead at a CMT level on the study itself. So I'm going to let him go first, and then I will add into it.
Well,
sure. Thank you, Mark. Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Henry, it is true, as what my Director of Transportation Services, Christine Kaler, mentioned, is that, and what Jeff had mentioned, is that receipt of that report was a little bit late, so out of alignment. However, many of the things identified within that modernization study deal with operations, not necessarily capital expenditures. And even operations, you can look at additional staffing. But what our approach right now is to continue to do more research. But we've already done some operational changes to date since receipt of that report. An example would be echelon plowing, which is the tandem, sort of not quite side by side, but plows following each other. And an example, just this last storm weekend, I've never seen 3 sets of tandem or echelon plowing occur at the same time. Generally, it's lucky to see 1. But these drivers were assigned to do more echelon plowing on the arterial roads, which kept them clear quicker and allowed us to access the residential neighborhoods quicker. And I think this last weekend, we would have been slower in clearing the residential neighborhoods, if not for that study. That's just one example. There's other minor capital improvements that talk about the electronic devices to help sense where we are through our GPS, which we already have. So we have our AVL system, GPS, that can feed into our plows with minimal costs as to where they are occurring and where we know there's what I'll call shade areas on our right-of-way because of the high rises and things like that. So they're more prone to icing where we might need to put more salt down. That's another example of where this study has come up with things that, well, there's capital investment, it's minor, and I think we can do those type of things within the existing budget. Big ticket items, have one big ticket item has been identified within the capital budget. It's within Commissioner Dykstra's area, and that is the West Side satellite yard, if you will. So we can perhaps store some salt over there, store other equipment, so that our plows and our trackless vehicles will not have to cross from the northwest part of the city over to the east side of the city just to pick up a load of salt or to refuel. So that type of big ticket item is in there, but most of the things we're trying to deal with, at least within this 3-year budget, operationally and with minimal capital investment. It's a journey, and as I said, even this last weekend, we've seen improvements as a result of that study.
So I'll add in to the discussion. Cam's really highlighted the key areas where there's some potential savings or actions. and that's where we want to see those being driven. In terms of little tweaks, if there's a concern from council in one area or another with regard to the active transportation service level improvements, working initially with finance to understand how we're positioned with the winter control reserve. If through maybe if the outcome's a lighter winter, there's some savings in our overall budgets, can those be redirected to whether it's understanding those priority routes that Jeff's working on? Do we mobilize some resources there? We've had a discussion about the potential where municipal enforcement services can dovetail in. There may be some opportunities to come forward with some additional allocation to support some initiatives that we'll hear more information on through updates on winter control.
Yeah, and I know that Chris is planning an implementation review and report on what the next steps were at some period of time later this year after she got some approval of the staff that she needs to do it and then the actual time to do it. So just looking forward, Mr. Rapp, and to both of you, I would hope that that implementation report would consider identifying what savings exist and not seeing a firm line between the two divisions of transportation and environment and parks in terms of where any of those savings could be repurposed for shifts in service levels. Right? So if council's priority was more on the AT, active transportation side, than the get into all the residential cul-de-sacs faster, that figuring out how to shift the savings into the areas of priority might be a way to expand how much we're doing sooner. So that's just what I'd hope that we'd be thinking about in terms of options for council to repurpose anything that's coming forward to help us meet strategic plan needs without needing additional budget.
Noted.
I just flag that.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Royce Bartley from beautiful Northwest Waterloo, which is growing so fast. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Mayor Jaworski. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. So, I guess piggybacking off that last question from Councillor Henry there, budget line item number 274 is directly related to the winter control modernization review. It is the operations center on the west side, and given, I'm really just repurposing a little bit of Councillor Henry's question. Given that the modernization review has been completed after the budget has come out, is there any consideration that this budget item may well move forward from 2025 into an earlier time frame?
Yes, through the mayor to Councillor Bodley. Some of the connections on that funding timing relate to a couple of things, availability of land for us to do any of this build piece. So there's some considerations along that, as well as the links to the DC on that line, the development charge and the post-period capacity as well. The funding sources play into that timing as well. And noting it's outside our current 3-year window, and we may be able to pull it forward, have that further discussion next budget cycle, and also when we review the DC bylaw as well. So there's options there, but a couple of factors still. We need the land first, and then we'd go from there.
Thank you, appreciate that. And I imagine in the next budget cycle that will be more considered, I guess, for an earlier time frame if it makes sense. My next question is around budget item 214, which is the museum website. And I know you and I had this conversation offline, but I just want to bring it online, I guess, around the potential of some sort of connectivity between all of our arts and culture pieces when it comes to a website. I know there's also discussion around a neighborhood association website in another budget item, and I would really personally advocate for looking to the Create Waterloo model that we have on our social media platforms, because when we go to the City of Waterloo's website, that's really where a lot of this stuff resides currently, whether it's community events or city-run events or museum. Those are all located in the same space on our city's website. And I think what we do with Create Waterloo, we already have sort of a baked in, I guess, base of customers, so to speak. We have almost 3,000 Facebook followers, almost 2,500 Twitter and Instagram followers. So I think the idea that we could connect all these together instead of having disparate websites doing different things would make sense. So I would just leave that as a comment for consideration. I'd like to ask about, further to Councillor Freeman's commentary around the West Side recreation lands, 228 and the associated line items around that. And maybe speaking to not just the challenges, notwithstanding Councillor Freeman's suggestion, which I think merits exploration as well, but speaking to the challenges that we're dealing with from a land acquisition perspective out in the West End, and also speaking to the challenges that we're dealing with respect to those recreation needs. What do we need out on the West End? What is the process going to be for us to figure out how we implement this long term? And given some of the challenges that we're dealing with from a land acquisition perspective, what sort of creative solutions might we need to consider as we're looking at this relatively large project in the Northwest End?
So if I can indulge council with a little bit of sort of the background and where we're going with this initiative, and really speaks to meeting the needs of the community on the west side of Waterloo, and whether it's a climate response to ability to travel across town to some of our other facilities. That's has been some of the thinking. Meeting demand for whether it's a set of diamonds, two is better than one if we look at that, a field that supports that. And that's where we're first trying to look at the acquisition of land. This has been in our budget for several years, and we're competing in a market where the city is growing, and land, we're set with in our boundaries, and there's competition for that land for a number of uses, whether it's for accommodations, business, and then recreation fits into that too. So we've had a number of leads on property, and they have not come to fruition. So we want to keep those funds and look for future needs as well, or opportunities as well. And this is where creativity comes to mind with how do we collaborate with other institutions in the community and the holdings they have. We're looking at that on all levels, whether it's with our universities or conservation authorities, the school boards. That's part of the dialogue, and when there's an opportunity, we'll be right there to look at it. We look at this in terms of land acquisition first, then we'll study the need, then we'll build it. So we want to finesse through that study time frame and that allocation on 257 to make sure we understand, we have a sense through the master plan where we want to be with diamonds and fields. We'll go a little deeper to understand the overall needs, if there's a need within that budget item for some preliminary concepts related to the environment that we have to situate this in. There's a number of pieces there that funding will help provide. And then we'll also consider those sort of more passive uses. If playground, how does that fit in? How does splash pad fit in? How does skate park fit in? So it becomes a real great outdoor space to visit. So that's the vision around there. And then we'll get to the build part with the allocations in future years. And we've tapped in various sources, whether it's DC, parkland dedication funds, some CRF as well on that. So we've used a number of resources to enable that, and the goal, hopefully in the next 10 years, that we'll be there with a fantastic facility that supports the residents and the broader community on the west side.
Excellent. Thank you. Look forward to seeing that in the next 10 years. And I do appreciate a lot of the work that's going on around some of the unprogrammed sort of recreation, whether it's the skate park at the Harper Library or whether it's the theoretical splash pad that we're going to have out on the West End somewhere, dog parks, etc. So very appreciative that there is a focus on recreation on the West End, notwithstanding the challenges that we're dealing with on this larger project. I wanted to pivot to a bit of the conversation around the 226 and 282, which is related to the I-4, I-6 infrastructure replacement rehabilitation stuff, 226 being parks, 282 being facilities. And I want to try and tie some of this conversation. We're talking a lot about infrastructure renewal here, and I know and I appreciate the comments around the fact that these are non-routine. These are going to be coming back at the end of Q2. But I wonder if you could take this opportunity now, while we're being asked to approve these budget items. I wonder if you could take the opportunity now to sort of speak to maybe what, especially in parks and facilities, what are residents going to see? What are the users going to see when they go into our parks and facilities from this investment that we're being asked to approve? And just some broad general examples I would appreciate.
Yeah, so appreciate the opportunity to share that. So in a visit to a park, currently you may see some asphalt that's not in the best of shape. You may see a backstop that's looking a little old and rusty. You may see that park bench that's not in the best of condition, that pedestrian bridge that maybe needs a little bit more TLC. And those are hands-on pieces when you're out walking, the residents out walking as a family, walking the dog, that they'll see an asset that's well cared for, and we're able to deliver on good services in that as a result. When we do snow plow, it doesn't result in all the asphalt pieces going to the side of the windrow. That new asphalt will support us advancing that. So we start to look at all those pieces within the park system. There's beyond pathways, there's the road system in several of our parks that needs that extra TLC as well. Old tar and chip roads that are there that need to be removed, rebuilt. Water lines to various locations that we should be enhancing and improving. Some storm sewers too in those parks. All of that becomes part of the renewal process too. I'm not sure if Jeff would like to add some more items as he's seeing these on a regular basis with his team. So come on up, Jeff.
Sure, just to add, one additional item. It's electric. Yeah. One additional item, and not just because my manager of forestry is here, but street tree pruning. And really it's preventative pruning. So it's establishing those regular pruning routines that are so important at the 5, 10, 15-year marks of new trees. So they're better established, and they're better, and they're resilient, and they can withstand those windstorms and those ice storms and all those things that come with climate change as well. So maybe a little less noticeable, but very important.
Maybe a few less buckets at Rim Park collecting water. That'd be...
Yeah, so that's on the park side. So definitely a metric maybe around that. So definitely, how do we do advance more of those roof replacements? How do we make sure all those pieces that you would do around your home, the homeowner would need to do. So I look at my own house, making sure my roof is solid. Do my windows need to be replaced? How's my furnace operating? Is it the most efficient furnace? If I have opportunity for air conditioning, how does that work in too? So all those asset pieces that Sundus noted that he would be assessing, I pointed in the business plan about that key initiative about understanding the asset, then advancing the plan. So all those pieces that are part of a building. And even if you look at how does paint come into play, and if the ability to paint something so it defers the rusting, and that is part of the vision too, that all those maintenance pieces, we start to do those preventative maintenance pieces on the small, maybe painting, but on the fan belts, all those pieces that are so integral to a mechanical system that we start to drive. So yes, broader on the building side too, and pulls those forward with this investment.
Great, thank you. Last two pieces, I guess, that are somewhat connected. And piggybacking again a little bit off Councillor Henry's commentary around municipal enforcement, which seems to be a broad theme here. I definitely appreciate the idea that we want to be neighborly and we want to have a neighborhood resolution, and I certainly appreciate the commentary around enforcement leading to sort of a legacy in the neighborhood that is perhaps negative. However, at the same time, I would suggest in speaking to some of my residents in particular. There is an expectation that if the neighborly solution has not worked, that we are going to be out resolving these issues. And I think particularly when it comes to sidewalk clearing, which Councillor Bonagor has spoken to. And so I want to tie all this together into a little bit of a conversation around sidewalk clearing, if I can, since this will perhaps be the last opportunity before budget day. I'm curious in the next 3 years what you see the role of bylaw enforcement in that regard. I think I've mentioned to you before, personally, I'm a little skeptical that bylaw is going to be able to get us out of the challenges that we're dealing with when it comes to sidewalk clearing. But I wonder if you could maybe speak to that to begin with, and sort of any broader initiatives around sidewalk clearing that are being contemplated.
I will go broader first, and then we can focus on the municipal enforcement. I may ask Jeff to chime in too with a bit of his work that he's been doing. So, as we've chatted about this with council in the past, November, December, we've discussed broader sidewalk snow clearing. We've talked about different survey potential. We're understanding where the city to the south, Kitchener, there's outcomes from their initiatives too, whether it's their bylaw piece and their pilots about actually cleaning that. And then the winter optimization and what Jeff spoke to about route assessment. All that can be, all that's part of the mix right now, and we can receive some direction from council over this term, recognizing where we're at in terms of the budget. There's no significant dollars being assigned to this initiative at this time, but there's a couple of areas. The facility, also within the supervisor of parks, there's a role there in terms of managing crews through the winter. So there is an investment to make sure there's a response and commitment to the areas that they are doing. We've, back in 2005 through 2008, had a similar conversation with council about the level of service, myself examined all the different options around a full service model across the city, looking at some arterial class 1 and 2 routes as well was part of the discussion. A conversation about bylaw process was at the time discussed as well, and had a conversation with council through a budget process as well. We are currently dealing with close to 100 kilometers of routes. Our staff of about a 500 kilometer network. We need to then consider neighborliness in terms of my responsibility as a citizen, where we have that now, and the majority of those 400 kilometers are business owner. And versus how quickly could we respond if we do everything citywide? What's our potential footprint from us having, say, an additional doubling the size of the fleet or tripling the size of the fleet that we have right now, and the cost associated with that? Is there a balance in between that we should be looking at to meet the need, whether it's some core routes or some corners or some of that extra support? And I think that'll come forward with a bit of the winter optimization, hearing outcomes from Kitchener that can help support that. On the enforcement end, I did have an opportunity to talk to Director Turner and the team and just see how are we doing on the enforcement side, and is there opportunity for some tweaks? And we believe there are within that. And maybe Shane, if you can just talk about your vision maybe for a potential 3-zone model, if that could support that. And so that, again, we've talked a little bit about all the sort of service delivery pieces through the operations side, but we've maybe not had the full discussion around this area of enforcement. Moving forward, as we get through this season, we can report back with some more concrete options, but this gives maybe some flavor of where we're at, and if there's some items that I've mentioned tonight that are interest to council, we can have a further look at those. I'm going to just grab my stuff here, Shane. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. And through you, Mayor Jaworski, there's I'm going to provide a response with 2 pieces to it. One is our existing processes, and the second piece will be the resource issue that Mr. Dykstra talked about. As a result of a joint presentation that we did with Parks and with Transportation Services back in back in the spring, we had indicated we were going to take a look at a review of our processes. And then we reported back by way of a briefing note back in, I believe it was late November, which indicated there were we found some opportunities to revamp our processes, to look at the use of technology again in terms of having more information available to the officers out on the street, getting complaints quicker to the officers out on the street, as opposed to cutting out that middle piece of someone else having to take the complaint and then process it. So we're encouraging the public to report online. So we've got the online portal process now to ensure that the complaint gets to the officer more directly and faster, as opposed to going through our normal process of being processed through admin. So that's just one example. We've also looked at the way the complaints are handled in terms of priorities, to ensure that what we found in the past, some of the complaints had that were a little older and or not as recent, lost priority status, and so that was a software issue that we were able to resolve. We're looking at processes to encourage repeat offenders to be more responsive. We've implemented late fee or inspection type fees for repeat offenders. So those are all the types of processes that we've put in place and are working on. They're in place, I should say. We're working through them now, and I think that it would be beneficial for us to have a review of those efficiencies at the end of this year. So we're still playing those out, and the results are going to be measured. The other piece around the resource issue is we've taken a look at the resource issue. It hasn't changed much in several years. It's evolved from a process that was at one time housed in our Works Department to a transition to municipal enforcement. So when we looked at our coverage, one of the items that had come up was the possibility of, based on the number of complaints and the distribution of complaints across the city, to establish 3 zones and have a dedicated officer for each zone for a 4-month period, and that's the 3-zone 3 model or 3-person model that Mr. Dykstra had talked about. In the briefing note that was submitted last week, had indicated what that cost would be, somewhere in the range of an incremental cost of about $57,000. Sorry, excuse me. So those are the pieces. I think that both have to be played out in terms of what their effectiveness would be. We certainly know that the resource issue that was put forward would increase our coverage, both in terms of officers and in terms of the amount of time the officers spend on the street over a 4-month period. Because right now there's times when we only have 1 officer on because their secondments are straddled. So that's a piece that has to be looked at, but it needs to be looked at in conjunction with the process improvements that we're playing out.
Thank you for that. A follow-up, maybe. Through and maybe this is more appropriate when we do our annual sort of winter control review, but I'm going to put it at least into the ear of people here to start with. And one is, I know last year when we talked about this, one of the challenges was around finding the right contractor to be able to clear sidewalks after we've identified them as being delinquent, for lack of a better word, after we've issued a ticket. And I wonder if there is a role for our staff to take that on, so that becomes less of an issue, and that we're not relying on some external contractor to get us out there.
Before Mr. Dykstra comments on the impact on the staff issues, one comment I will make is, and I forgot to mention that in the implement or in the other stuff that we've implemented, that we actually have now. Mr. Mehta has worked with our contractor and has established a set of service standards that didn't exist before. So we are anticipating, and again, we'll have to measure that, but we are anticipating that we will have an enhanced level of service and dedicated service through our contractor. we believe that the contractor process is probably better than utilizing staff because of the challenges, but I'll let Mr. Dexter speak to that.
Yeah, just to add on, that's the success we're having with the current contractor is really positive. We want to commit, chatting with the operations crews and managers within Just Team. We want to keep those staff doing the functions and the tasks that they need to with all the other sidewalks that we have to deal with. We find then we lose the ability to dedicate that equipment on a regular basis to those long runs and keep them going. From an efficiency point of view, our preference is to use our existing staff on the runs that we're responsible for. It also helps us to manage a 24/7 operation as well. Those some benefits that enables us to, with Shane's crew, get some of that extra work done in the process he has, whether it's an extension of how he handles lot maintenance and other issues too. So that would be a comment I'd offer council too on that item.
Appreciate that. And then lastly, for consideration and perhaps a personal story. I think last week, 2 weeks ago, I was parked in the parking lot here and I had my 2019 parking pass showing, not my 2020 parking pass showing. I received something that looked and smelled and felt like a ticket on my dashboard, or on my windshield, excuse me. But it was actually a warning, and it was a $0 payment thing. And it was the last thing that I needed to convince me to throw out my 2019 parking pass. And I wonder if this, because we don't have the same sort of rules around issuing those, perhaps we don't have the same rules as around issuing those as we do issuing actual tickets. If that's something that we could look towards potentially implementing when we come across a delinquent sidewalk again, as a thought process to motivate people to actually get out there and do it. And thank you for the leniency, by the way.
It helps to have license plates recorded. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, if I'm understanding correctly, you're equating, and I apologize if I'm not connecting the dots, equating that process to the sidewalk snow removal process, or are you still on the in terms of parking tickets or anything in terms of bylaw in general? I'm sorry, I'm trying to connect the dot.
I'm just curious if we can, when we're going around from a proactive sort of bylaw enforcement perspective, if we can are we able to issue those non-ticket tickets immediately without waiting the requisite couple of days or giving the 24-hour notice that we've talked about previously? Is that something that we can do particularly early in the season to really show people, yes, in fact, bylaw people are out here and looking at this, and perhaps that's from an education piece enough to motivate people like me to throw out their parking pass, and in this case, to shovel their driveway.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, certainly the most of the start of season education that we've done has been through social media, through our website and such. You're talking about more of a boots on the ground type of an approach, and under our current model, it would be a challenge, but we'd have to look at innovative ways to be proactive, because our existing resources primarily are focusing on the complaints that come in. But I think there are ways to communicate to neighborhoods, and it may be that we're talking about reminders throughout a neighborhood, not just where we're seeing a snow piled up. Of course, the challenge with that is the message has to be soft enough that people understand that this is a courtesy message and not necessarily a warning. So I think there are, you raised some good points, and I think those are things that we can take back. I do believe that the sidewalk snow removal, like many things in our division and other divisions, it's about continuous improvement, and sometimes using that cliche, thinking outside the box in terms of those approaches. So we'll certainly take that back. The short answer, which I haven't provided, is that yes, it is something that we can look at.
Thank you. And I just want to wrap up by saying I appreciate the efforts and the discussion that's going into this conversation and the thoughtfulness. By no means do I think me as a new councillor coming up here that I've reinvented the wheel and come up with some genius idea that no other municipality's done or hasn't been considered at the City of Waterloo before. And I know a lot of this is a rehash of stuff that you guys have done historically. So I appreciate you indulging me at least, and I appreciate the conversation, and hopefully we can get to a point where things have improved when we're looking back three or more years from now. Thank you.
And as I look to Councillor Veith and I have 11 more. No, I don't. I think
I forgot about the mayor. Yes, the mayor's questions.
Well, I was trying to think of something to ask Steve Heldman because he sort of come out lucky in all this. I could ask him about Albert McCormick, but I know he's on top of that, and I know we care a lot about that. So I think just to, that's it. Mark, do you have any final commentary?
I would say great discussion with council on all these areas, and as you know, again, one of my comments, we built a business plan recognizing there is room for improvements even today through the conversation areas where we need to refocus and maybe retool a little bit as we go away even over the next little bit. But moving forward, lots of initiatives, as you can see in community service area, lots of touch points. Feel we have a strong plan to move forward the strat plan and look forward to doing that, and look forward to the discussions in the next couple of weeks with council on all these items. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to Tim Anderson and all the commissioners and all the directors for all the great work in the business plans, to Philippe and Brad for all the support that you've had here. I think we've sort of worked through all the business plans. I'll turn it over to Finance Chair Councillor Henry for some more.
Thanks. Since we are on wrap up now of business plans and we get into the budget approval phase, I thought I'd just provide council as much of a roadmap as I can today, and I'll provide a greater one next week when we've got the bigger meat in front of us. In terms of capital budget day, council has been great so far about asking not just business plan questions and operating budget questions, but also capital budget questions of all of the divisions as they come up. This is good. The decision points that we have next week are on predominantly, should all the routine projects still be routine projects, or should they require another report to be released? So our effort next week will be spent on categorizing, but that is in effect the last best chance to really take a stab at the capital budget and making sure that it is meeting council's needs. So if council does not like an item in the capital budget, whether it's routine or non-routine, that is one we should have a conversation about, because it's possible asking staff to do a bunch of work to generate a report that council will reject is the wrong thing to do. And so I would encourage everybody to take that last pass through the capital book, and if there's anything nagging on your mind that you're thinking about or you want to think about engaging on, next week is the week to really sink into that, so we can be as efficient and effective as possible on budget day, where we've got enough on the go on the operating budget. And I'll provide council some more commentary on how operating budget on how budget day will work next week when I've had a chance to understand from staff how they think it's going to work, and then we can relay that to council. So in terms of how next week will unfold, that agenda will look much like the last cycle. We'll have the routine and non-routine items up by department and sub by division. We're going to be hearing high level from our CFO, and then we're going to be hearing from our commissioners about that categorization and generally what those projects are doing writ large in terms of growth and rehab and in terms of strategic plan priorities. So we'll be getting that picture as we go through those, but we'll be taking them division by division and making those decisions then, rather than let everybody talk and then do it. So that's how it worked last year, but we don't always remember what happened last year. So that's how we'll be processing on capital budget day.
Well, believe it or not, after 3 hours, we are now at item 6, consent motion, of which there isn't one. But we do have one staff report before we recess, and that is the Union Street Reconstruction King to Moore funding request release. Report prepared by Gavin Vermeer. Does anybody have questions? Maybe even the ward councillor. Anybody have any questions? Seeing none. Maybe moved by the ward councillor, Councillor Bonigar, seconded by Councillor Henry. All those in favor? That's approved by all of us. We are recessed.